My British Empire. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 101. Watching a drama. Master. Do you need me to buy a ticket for you? Guy looked at Edward and kept observing the four theaters, and asked with a wink. Yes? You can buy a few tickets to the Rose Theater. Let's go and see it. Edward thought about it, and finally chose the Rose Theater. Roses have a special meaning to him, and more importantly, the coat of arms of the Tudor royal family is composed of red and white roses. Hearing that Edward agreed, Baron Smith immediately walked to the ticket office with a haughty look. Seeing the middle-aged man in aristocratic attire walking over swaggeringly, the crowd in line stared at him unanimously. The expressions of surprise on their faces could not be stopped. My lord, I don't know what you need me to do. A thin, middle-aged man with mischievous eyebrows and mouse eyes walked over with an apologetic smile, with a dog-like look on his face. Help me buy 3 copies of this Rose Theater. This is for you. Baron Smith didn't have the slightest dislike for the arrival of this middle-aged man, but was rather interested. He took out a shilling and threw it at the naughty middle-aged man. My lord, just wait here, I'll be here soon, he said, shaking his messy long hair, and hurried to the ticket office. It was said to be a box office, but it was just a wooden hut standing upright around the corner of the theater, with a window a little smaller than ordinary windows open behind a dark and tomb-oil-smelling curtain. A thin man was tearing tickets for ticket buyers. The ticket is a piece of rough paper the size of a palm, with a miniature picture of the Rose Theater painted on the paper, which looks very distinctive. Carefully tearing off 3 sheets from the entire sheet, the thin man lifted the curtain and stretched it out with his withered hands. Hold it, here is your ticket, except for the first 3 rows. You can sit anywhere. And a man who seemed to be from a relatively well-to-do family followed with his right hand, and then responded softly, and stop talking, let's go in. Following the ticket, the man held an 8-year-old boy by his left hand and said to his stylishly dressed wife after the family of 3 bought the tickets. The middle-aged man with the mischievous eyebrows leaned his arms on the window, tilted his buttocks, and stuck his head in. Such indecent behavior caused a young woman in her 20s to look at her with disgust. She stepped back, and caused complaints from the people in the queue behind. Regardless of the complaints behind him, the man spoke directly to the ticket seller, who was inside, with a shocked expression. Hey, dude, give me 3 front row seats. No, sir, please go to the queue first. Your current behavior makes me sick. The thin ticket seller had a disgusted expression on his face and made a gesture of please. Oh no, my sir, don't be so busy refusing. How about I give you 2pence? The man with wicked eyebrows and mouse eyes said quietly, with a look on his face that I think about you. Okay. Just this time, the man who sold the ticket hesitated for a while, thinking that 2 pence was almost the food expenses of his family for a day, and then decisively agreed. I'll give you a shilling, and you only need to find me 8 pence. The wretched man showed what he should have done, and took out a shilling from Baron Smith. Hey, dude, you make a lot of money. The ticket seller looked at him and smiled. Come to me directly if there is such a thing in the future. Yes, if there's business, I will definitely come to you. When I thought that I earned 7 pence a day and didn't have to worry about eating for a week, I couldn't help laughing. Dude, I'll come to you next time. Holding the 3 tickets in his hand, the wretched man came to Baron Smith with proud steps. Sir, here's the ticket you want. The wretched man bent down and said with his head down, this is the seat in the first 3 rows. You can sit with these gentlemen as you like. Well, you can go. Baron Smith knew that the price would definitely not be that much, but he would not be interested in such a small amount of money. Besides, the rest would be considered travel expenses. He knew that dignified nobles would not need to queue up like ordinary people. No longer looking at the wretched man in front of him, Baron Smith turned around and came to Edward, asking softly, Master, the ticket is back, really? Then let's go in. Hearing what Baron Smith said, Edward immediately opened his legs and walked towards the middle door. One of the doors of the Rose Theater was about 6 feet wide and was half open, and the performances within could be faintly heard. Standing in front of the gate were 2 burly men who looked to be 6 feet tall, and this was indeed a deterrent to the English, who were generally malnourished and only 5.5 feet tall. They are not only ticket inspectors, but also theater bodyguards. After all, in this chaotic Shoreditch area, it is difficult to do business without some guarantee of force. Sir, please show your ticket. Among the 2 big men, a big man with a beard stopped Edward, who was about to enter. Here, remember, in the future, don't put your arms around. Baron Smith gave the 2 guards a hard look. Here are our tickets. His Excellency the Baron threw the 3 tickets on the table in front of the guard, his eyes sharp. The 2 froze for a moment, watching Edward and the others walk in slowly regardless of the situation between Baron Smith and the guard. Edward walked in with curiosity. The gate is in the middle of the entire hall. It is an amphitheater built according to the format of the inn courtyard. There is no lighting and it can only perform during the day. The stage has no curtains, and extends into the auditorium, so you can watch the play from 3 sides. Entering from the door, to the left is the first 3 rows of high-end seats. It is said to be high-end, but it is a little more spacious than ordinary seats and looks a little better. If you go to the right, it occupies most of the ordinary positions. The 3-foot-wide wooden chairs are neatly arranged, and the heights are raised backwards one by one, which is for the appreciation of the effect. According to Edward's visual inspection, there are about 600 ordinary seats, and nearly 200 high-end seats. If you charge 3p for an ordinary position and 5p for a premium position, that's £5 for a show, and it is impossible to perform only 1 performance a day. If you perform 5 performances a day, you can earn £25 a day. However, no matter how well it is done, it is impossible to have a full seat, so if the income of more than £10 per day is excluded from the venue expenses and personnel expenses, there will not be much profit left every day. After such a calculation, Edward also gave up the idea of opening a theatre. English drama originated in church liturgy. In the Easter Mass in the 9th century, there was an episode called Who Are You Looking For? A priest dressed up as an angel guarding the tomb of Christ, and 3 other priests dressed up as 3 women named Mary came to visit the Holy Sepulchre. They had a dialogue. Singing and performing movements already have the prototype of a drama, and thus developed into drama performed as a part of the church service, called liturgical drama. Liturgical dramas were gradually secularized during the development process. From the 13th century onwards, priests were replaced by citizens, dialects were used instead of Latin, and performances were performed outside church's dramatic form. But the content is still mainly reenacting the stories of the Bible and the deeds of the saints, which are called mystery plays or miracle plays. The establishment of the Tudor dynasty ended the long war. Afterwards, England carried out the religious reformation, and the ruling group implemented a series of more enlightened policies. Miracle plays and morality plays continued to be popular during this period, but the religious significance in the plays weakened, and morality plays took on political overtones at this time. It was N. Udall's 1505 to 1556, Ralph Loyster Doyster on stage, which was the first comedy in British history. Although it was in parody of Roman comedy once the play was performed, it was well received. The people used this funny show that had never been done before to relieve the suffering in life. Therefore, even in winter, the weather is relatively cold, but people from afar are still crowded. Of course, half of the high-end seats are still occupied, and there are still very few rich people. Coincidentally, there was a family of 3 sitting in front of Edward when buying tickets, and the husband was talking about a plot with his wife and son endlessly. The general plot is, there is a bragging knight Ralph. When he proposes to a rich widow, he is defeated by a businessman, which is not new. The novelty of this play is that it breaks the positive image of knights since the Middle Ages, and the clown has changed from a businessman to a knight. Judging from its conception, what it promotes is the set of capitalism, elevating businessmen and improving the image of businessmen among ordinary people. Hearing this, Edward watched the drama with an entertainment mind. After more than an hour, the performance of this play was over. After experiencing the rich and colorful entertainment life of later generations, Edward was completely indifferent to the baggage in this play, and applauded along with the audience. However, the audience present was very happy, and the applause was extremely strong. He looked up and saw that the family in front of them had already laughed so hard that they couldn't straighten up. Only the children followed their parents with confused eyes and clapped their little hands without knowing why. Baron Smith and Andre, who were sitting next to Edward, covered their stomachs with one hand and their mouths with the other. It was obvious that the dramatic performance made them unable to control themselves. Let's go backstage and have a look." Edward glanced at the two laughing together, and said speechlessly, standing up from his seat. Edward did not walk towards the exit, but cut through the crowd and walked to the back of the performance stage, followed by Baron Smith and Andre. Chapter 102 Udall. After several people passed, Edward came to the backstage. Looking at a room with linen rags hanging in front of him, he guessed that it was the backstage. After his two generals followed, Edward lifted the curtain and walked over in a swaggering manner. At this time, the actors who had just finished their performance were hurrying to rest, and there were still a few of them who hadn't removed their makeup, and sat on the ground regardless of their appearance, flapping their sleeves and fanning themselves to catch the cold. Suddenly, The sound of the door curtain being raised attracted all the resting actors, and a dozen pairs of eyes stared at Edward. "Hey, everyone, who is your person in charge? I have something to talk to him about." Edward didn't care about the eyes of everyone, as if he was the master, and asked everyone directly as for the young man who suddenly appeared in front of him dressed like an aristocrat. The actors didn't know how to deal with it, so they all responded in silence, and no one got up to drive Edward away just like that. The air in the room condensed for a while, and finally, a person dressed as a knight stood up and greeted him. To be precise, it was a young man with knight makeup and exaggerated and gorgeous knight costume. "Sir. Hello, what do you want from me?" The young man was in his 20s at most, with long dark brown hair and a blue beard on his face. He put on a smiling face and asked Edward very politely. Evidently Edward's clothes made him wary. "You are the proprietor of this theater? Don't be joking, my sir." Edward was surprised that a man in his 20s became a theater owner, as if he had heard a joke. "Besides, there is no boss who will perform on stage in person." No. You misunderstood me. I'm just the manager of the Rose Theatre. Our Rose Theatre belongs to the Earl of Boswell, the Lord Boswell, the Minister of the Privy Council." The young man hurriedly waved his hand, quickly denied it, and finally emphasized the ownership of the theatre, as if he thought Edward, a son of a nobleman, was here to make trouble at this time. In order to obtain political asylum, the drama theatre still belonged to a certain nobleman in name, but the actors were independent in person. "Oh, that's easy to explain. I just wanted to ask who wrote this play you're performing?" "Don't be so nervous." Edward looked at the group of people who were facing an enemy, and said speechlessly, "Sir, it turns out that you are looking for Udal." After hearing Edward's explanation, the people who stood up were relieved, but they still kept a look of vigilance on their faces. "Sir, please forgive our impoliteness. If you want to find Udal, you can go to Lionkey Street in the Riverside district. You can ask casually and you will know his location." The young manager smiled gracefully and answered Edward's questions politely. "Well, thank you, Mr. Young Manager, I think we will meet again." Edward smiled at him mysteriously, then turned around and led Baron Smith and Andre out of the sweaty room. The young manager stood there in a daze, pondering over what Edward said before he left. His mind was full of questions, and he couldn't figure it out. "Sir, are you okay?" An actor playing the businessman came up and asked the young manager. "Nothing. Everyone, take a good rest. There will be another performance later," the young manager answered casually, then turned and said to the actors who were at a loss after leaving the backstage. Edward smiled and said to the tall Andre while walking, "Andre, when you go back, go talk to the owner of the Rose Theatre. No. Talk to these 4 theaters for a while and buy them at a favorable price. You are limited to 1 week to complete, otherwise you will have good fruit to eat." After listening to Edward's instructions, Andre looked confused. He couldn't figure out why His Majesty the King bought these theaters. Does His Majesty like to watch dramas? Edward ignored the bewildered eyes of Andre behind him, and boarded the rental carriage summoned by Baron Smith. Will Edward tell him the importance of public opinion guidance? This time the carriage was closed, with the curtains pulled down. The smell of the street could no longer enter Edward's nose. Therefore, even though Edward felt that his butt was a little tight, he was still very satisfied sitting in a carriage, crossed London Bridge, came to the inner city, and Edward wandered back to Whitehall Palace. After getting off the carriage, Guy naturally bid farewell to Edward, while Andre, who had already become a servant of the royal family, was still following Edward. "I moved my body, to be precise. I moved my buttocks. Invite that man named Udal later, and stay at Whitehall Palace. I want to see him." Andre, who watched Edward doing strange movements, responded humbly, looking like a servant seeing Edward disappearing into the palace little by little. Andre turned around and got into the ordinary carriage. Andre stayed in the carriage with a calm face. He was very confident that he could call the man named Udal, but how to buy these 4 theaters at a relatively affordable price was very troublesome. The kings in the Middle Ages did not have the incomparable power of the Chinese emperors, and in the West they also emphasized the inviolability of private property. The wind and rain can enter, but the king cannot enter to buy things. You have to sell real gold coins to buy them. If you don't see the money, these greedy merchants will not let go. What's more, even the Rose Theatre has Earl Boswell as its backer, and several other theaters are not vegetarian. As a petty servant, even the servant of His Majesty the King of England, he couldn't let these greedy merchants back down. "Sir, we've reached Landeck Street, and the carriages can't get in. I'll wait for you here," the groom's thick voice echoed in the carriage, waking up Andre, who was thinking, "Okay, wait for me here. I'll be back in a while." Andre opened the car curtain to see how simple this Landeck Street is. For a moment, What came into view was an alley with a width of only 2 feet, which only allowed one person to pass through. It would be embarrassing if he was a little fatter. On both sides are low shed areas made of mud and mud. The narrow wooden shed area is not big, but as far as Andre looks, there are countless people lying densely, people of all colors just lay down on the hay, and families laid down and slept together. Some people even know how to use some rags as curtains and some wood as a partition wall, knowing how to cover it, while some people's homes, except for a shed on the top, just lie on the ground regardless of the image. Well, I don't know how to live or die, but this narrow alley is surprisingly long. Looking at the intersection now, there is no end in sight. It is conservatively estimated that there are as many as 1,000 people. Andre didn't want to search step by step, which would make people exhausted, so he thought of a clever way. "Hey, little brother, do you know Udall?" Andre caught a little boy playing and bent down to ask her. "Yes, is that Udall who often writes?" the little boy said timidly with his upper body bare. Seeing that the little boy was naked in this cold winter, Andre couldn't help feeling the same way. He remembered the hard times when he was a child, and his tone became softer. "Yes, I'll give you 2pence if you take me." Looking at the 2 pennies in Andre's hand, the little boy couldn't help swallowing, as if seeing food. 2 pennies will buy 2 of the worst brown breads, enough to feed a family for days. "Well, good sir, come with me." The little boy hurriedly agreed, as if the 2 pence would disappear after a while. Follow the little boy to walk forward slowly and hard. Even though Andre was not careful, his legs were still stained with mud. After walking for about 10 minutes, the little boy stopped at a rickety wooden shed. The only bright spot is that there are several canvases around the wooden shed as a wall, which protects privacy very well. Looking at the little boy's eyes full of hope, Andre gave him 2 pennies. Seeing the little boy leave happily, Andre directly opened the curtain and walked in. I saw a middle-aged man with an unshaven face lying on a bed made of hay, with a few sheets of paper filled with words beside him. Just when he was about to read what was written on the paper, the middle-aged man who had closed his eyes suddenly opened his eyelids and stared at Andre in a daze. At this moment, Andre had the feeling of being caught as a thief, and felt very embarrassed. Are you Mr. Udall?" Andre immediately changed the subject and asked, "I am. I wonder if you are?" Udall looked at Andre sleepily and asked back, "Your Majesty, the king invites you to go over. Now, follow me immediately." Andre looked at the slovenly middle-aged man with disgust in his eyes, and said in an unquestionable tone, "But there's nothing to worry about. Now I'll take you to change. My God, I really don't know how you survived." So, when they arrived at Whitehall Palace, standing in front of Edward was a gray-bearded old man with thinning hair, wearing a fat white long coat and sleeved jacket. "Come on, do it, Mr. Udall. Don't be so formal." Udall looked at Edward dressed as the king, his body cowered, as if he could hold an egg in his mouth. Yes, your Majesty, it's an honor to meet you. It's really an honor." After Udall stammered and said such a sentence, he became a dull gourd again. "Don't be nervous, Mr. Udall. I heard that you wrote the play performed at the Rose Theatre." Regarding Edward's question, Udall was a little cranky. Did this drama offend the king? After hesitating for a while, he replied bluntly, "Yes, Your Majesty. This is a script I wrote." "Very good, my husband. I admire your talent very much. I invite you here. Just need you to do me a favor." Chapter 103. Your Majesty, it is my honor as a subject of England to serve you. Udall, who was wearing plain linen and canvas shoes, bowed to Edward in a gentlemanly manner, and his temperament immediately changed. "Different, okay, Mr. Udall. In fact, I really appreciate your talent." Edward enjoyed Udall's compliment for a while, and then said to him in an easygoing tone, "I wonder if you would like to serve the royal family." "Your Majesty, I am willing to serve the great royal family." Hearing Edward's solicitation, Udall felt as if a pie had fallen from the sky, and he was a little dizzy, as if he couldn't believe it. Immediately, he reacted, quickly nodded his messy head, and quickly agreed. "This is really a pleasant decision." Edward nodded, approving his decision. "So, Mr. Udall, I have a task for you now." Seeing a serious expression appear on Edward's face, Udall immediately sat up, and his attitude became serious. "Do you know the deeds of my grandfather, the late King Henry VIII?" "Of course, my lord, I know the deeds of King Henry VIII well. Up to now, many people are missing the good times of His Majesty's reign." Hearing Edward's question, Udall answered without hesitation, with reverence and nostalgia on his face, and even more exaggeratedly, there seemed to be a tear in his eyes. "Historically, in 1471, King Henry VIII of England was killed by Edward IV, and the Lancastrian dynasty was replaced by the York dynasty. The Tudor family was also exiled to France in May 1471. Henry Tudor, who was only 14 years old, as the only remaining male heir of the Lancaster family, was protected by his uncle, escaped across the sea, and came to Brittany, France, where he was regarded as Lancaster, the leader of the sect. His mother, Princess Margaret Beaufort, remarried Lord Thomas Stanley in England, lurking in England under the rule of the York dynasty to plan for her son's future after the death of Edward IV in 1483. Richard launched a coup to abolish Edward V on June 26, 1483. Richard himself ascended the throne and became Richard III in 1485. The political actions of King Richard III caused dissatisfaction among the British nobles. Taking advantage of Richard III's low popularity, Princess Margaret was able to turn dissatisfied Yorkist supporters into supporting his son Henry. Richard III's political enemies turned to Henry Tudor, who was in exile in France. Many proposed and favored the marriage of Elizabeth of York, daughter of Edward IV, to Henry Tudor. They saw this as a means of ending the feud between the Yorks and the Lancastrians. One of the most talked about is the Battle of Bosworth. After Richard III's attempt to kidnap Henry in France failed, Henry Tudor had more followers in England, so Henry Tudor declared himself the heir to the throne of the Lancastrian royal family on August 1, 1485. Henry VIII set sail from Harfleur with the patronage of King Charles VIII of France. He was accompanied by his uncle Jasper Tudor, Lord of Oxford, and some knights in exile with him, and his fleet was fully loaded with some 2,000 French mercenaries. He made landfall at Mill Bay, near Milford Haven, on August 7. After landing, Henry VIII was blessed by God. To put it simply, he was like Emperor Han Guangwu, the founder of the Eastern Han Dynasty, and went extremely smoothly. First he marched eastward. He first marched to Haverfordwest, then to Aberystwyth, and arrived at Aberystwyth on August 10, 1485, and on this way, no one resisted. Then he continued to march east and northeast, not only easily captured Welshpool, but also occupied Shrewsbury on August 15. After this he took Newport, Stafford, Lichfield, Tamworth and Atherstone on August 20, 1485. Henry Tudor camped in Atherstone. He sent someone to contact the great nobles, Norfolk family, Northumberland family, Stanley family, who were still in Richard III's camp. All of these families agreed to support him in his position. What is even more exaggerated is that he only issued a call to action at the end of 1484, which was just his casual behavior. However, it inspired a team of nearly 5,500 people in the UK. This was in the Middle Ages. When did the people become so powerful? Realizing the seriousness of the situation, Richard III raised a 10,000-strong army to fight. On August 22, the two sides fought a decisive battle at Bosworth in central England. At this time, Henry VIII had only 2,000 mercenaries, but when he came to fight Richard III, he had 10,000 troops, an army that had gone through the war. But Henry VIII still has 5,000 folk supporters on the way. However, here comes the important point. At this critical juncture of the battle, Richard III's generals, Lord Thomas Stanley, Henry's stepfather, and the Earl of Northumberland stood still, while Lord Stanley's younger brother, Sir William Stanley, led 3,000 people to the public. After defecting, the York army disintegrated. Richard III wore the crown and fought the enemy until he died. His crown fell in a bush during the battle, was found by Lord Thomas Stanley, and dedicated to Henry Tudor. So, after only 14 days of fighting, it was called marching, Henry Tudor became the King of England, and it was for Henry VIII that he created the Tudor dynasty in British history. Therefore, for this dramatic story, Edward felt that it was necessary to publicize it, and it was necessary for the divine right of kings to be deeply rooted in the hearts of the people. Do you think it's a pity that such an interesting and commemorative event is not written into drama? Edward said in an exaggerated tone. It seemed that Udall had missed an important historical event. Your Majesty, do you mean to make the story of His Majesty Henry VIII into drama? Udall asked with some uncertainty. Does His Majesty the King like drama? Yes, the miraculous deeds of my grandfather. It's time for the whole of England to know, Edward said with fiery emotion. Udall felt that the eyes of His Majesty the King in front of him were burning hot, and his body was almost cooked. Your Majesty, are you sure that His Majesty Henry VIII will be on the humble stage of drama? Yes, I allow my grandfather Henry VIII to appear in plays and to be played as my grandfather Henry VIII. As for those nobles who appear, I will help you get well, don't worry. Edward saw the hesitation in the eyes of Mr. Dramatist in front of him, so he assured him, comforting his fragile heart. At this time, the status of drama was very low. Let alone the royal family, even the nobles were not allowed to perform. so there are no figures about nobles in the drama. So, after more than an hour, inspired by the great King Edward, a Richard III offended God, and Henry VIII received the blessing and revelation of God, and under the blessing of the great God, Henry VIII came back from France, was supported by nobles and commoners along the way, and the story of defeating Richard III took shape. In this story, Richard III became the villain, while Henry VIII was the protagonist. He not only embraced the beauty, but also defeated the evil villain, and managed the people of the British Isles instead of God. This is the outline written by Edward Udall. As for filling in the content, Edward instructed him to refer to the materials in the royal family. As for the theme, it focuses on the background of the divine right of the Tudor royal family and the glorious history of the Tudor royal family. Saving the people of England strive to achieve the level of 9 truths and 1 falsehood, so that people will be convinced, and even become real history. Watching Udall walking towards the royal library, Edward heaved a long sigh. I am afraid that in the near future, there will be another type of historical war in the genre of drama, so I can count myself as an outstanding contribution to the development of drama. In the future, I might get the title of Father of Drama. Edward thought silently in his heart, the corners of his mouth slightly raised. Your Majesty, Mr. Guy of the Dark Blade begs to see you. Edward was interrupted by the maid Lucy before he finished lusting. Call him in. Edward ordered as if nothing had happened. Soon, with brisk steps, Captain Guy came to Edward's side. My Lord Commander, why are you back again? What's the matter? Edward looked at Guy Ham, who was less than 2 fighters away, and asked with some doubts. Your Majesty, I just got a piece of news that the resentment of the citizens of London towards the royal family and your Majesty has risen sharply, and some even insulted you in public. Speaking of this, Captain Guy was filled with righteous indignation and excitement, as if the citizens of London were not scolding Edward, but him. Then, my Mr. Ham, why do the townspeople scold me? Could it be that I did something heinous? It seems that I still don't have dignity. Edward felt that this was an unwarranted disaster. He didn't do anything, so why would someone scold him blindly? Besides, the frequency of scolding myself has increased recently. Therefore, Edward was still a little annoyed, and his tone became much harder. Your Majesty, according to the information I have inquired, it is mainly those small merchants who offended you. Do you want me to deal with them? Guy grinned, showing an exaggerated and fierce expression, and Edward saw his yellow and black teeth in an instant. Then why are they scolding me? Edward calmed down and opened his mouth to ask. I heard that the London City Council said that in order to celebrate your Majesty's taking office, each person was charged an extra 5 pence a month. Chapter 104 Wood. After Commander Gay casually said a word, he pursed his lips tightly. His dark face looked a little tired. Some rough hands were held slightly, and if one looked carefully, the skin under his chest hair was already covered with fine beads of sweat. His eyes narrowed slightly, and his head began to slowly tilt down. He knew that His Majesty's anger was about to wash away the city of London. It's simply unreasonable. I just asked them to compensate for the losses they should have. They didn't say anything clearly, but they even did it secretly. Okay. That's great. It seems that the majesty of the king has not come for a long time, and some people have forgotten it. When Edward heard Guy's words, his eyes rolled, and he immediately understood that these London businessmen were unwilling to give up £30,000 for nothing. They used Edward's name to raise taxes. In this way, not only can they make up for the loss of £30,000, but they can even make a lot of profit. What is exasperating is that not only did Edward not get a pound, but he also became a villain for no reason. You know, in the time of Henry VIII and Henry VI, if the merchants were so bold, they would have been hanged long ago, and this group of businessmen had the courage to provoke themselves. They really thought they were made of mud. Guy, how many players Dark Blade has in London at the moment? Edward thought for a while, and the thumb and index finger of his right hand scratched each other unconsciously. And the long nails he had kept were struggling inside and out. He glanced at the leader of the Dark Blade, who lowered his head and pretended to be a snail, and asked with a sullen face, Your Majesty, relying on your annual appropriation and the protection fees we collect, according to your plan, London is now divided into 4 jurisdictions. And each jurisdiction has a centurion-level number of people, so, including my commander's self-government area, there are now 564 people in London, and the current number is still growing slowly. As for those who can fight and do well, they only have less than 400 people. As he said that, Commander Gay, who was still a little complacent, was a little embarrassed, and lowered his head in a little shame. He felt that when His Majesty the King needed him, he had fewer capable manpower, which was not conducive to His Majesty's plan. In fact, this is related to his recruitment plan. As a bankrupt intellectual, He still prefers people like him, so basically what he can recruit is those intellectuals who can read and write, followed by rough people who can fight. Edward took a breath and calmed down his mood. He wanted to say some curse words, but felt that he was not respectable to the king. My lord commander, what you did is not bad. I think it's just a problem with your recruiting strategy. Just change it and it will be perfect. Edward was about to spew out bad words, but he turned a corner in time, because he thought about it, and he couldn't blame him. After all, he had never done this kind of business. I have been letting him manage it like a sheep. In the absence of a reference, it is already very good to reach this level, and his confidence should not be suppressed. So, my excellency the commander, let's start to meet this important task. When Commander Guy was preparing to greet Edward's saliva, unexpectedly, he waited for an understatement, which can be said to be mostly a compliment. Just as he was in a daze for a moment, Edward began to announce the mission. Subordinate to the royal family of England, commander of the Dark Blade, Guy Ham, follow your instructions. His Majesty Edward VI. Guy immediately reacted, knelt on one knee, put his right hand on his chest, slightly lowered his head full of black curly hair, and made a thick voice. Commander Guy, now I order you to immediately mobilize all the personnel belonging to the Dark Blade in London to investigate the entire incident of slandering the royal family in London and find out the real mastermind behind it. As he spoke, Edward took out a black pottery shard from the wooden box behind him, which was specially fired to form the English version of the tiger talisman. This is a custom-made rule that started with Edward setting up the Dark Blade. The leader of the Dark Blade can only mobilize the troops of a centurion in addition to the 100 or so people he belongs to. If you want to mobilize other centurions, you need the lion-shaped tiger amulet in Edward's hand and his tiger amulet as one. Yes, for the glory of England and for His Majesty the King, I must complete the task. Holding the tiger talisman in Edward's hand, Commander Guy stood up and replied with a passionate voice. After Guy bid farewell to Edward, he walked out of Whitehall Palace with a ruddy face, his neatly combed beard trembling, and narrated his master's excited mood. Guy swaggered to a small villa in London, which was the new headquarters of Dark Blade. The small restaurant before could no longer accommodate the ever-expanding Dark Blade, and as a spy department, it was not appropriate to be in a noisy small restaurant. So Guy reapplied to Edward, and Edward used a villa obtained by confiscating his home as Dark Blade's new headquarters. My lord. My lord. The two guards, Ziolala, greeted with laughter when they saw their boss coming. Well, do it well. Guy patted one of them on the shoulder and said encouragingly to the two of them, yes, yes. The two nodded in unison, with an expression of being valued on their faces. Their spirits became more and more lifted, and their waists became straighter. Guy has done countless times for such a small and cost-effective thing, and it has even become his habit. My lord. As soon as Guy entered his office, a short and lean man stood up and greeted him. Wood, your report is very meaningful. His Majesty the King is very satisfied. You can become a royal knight after completing a few more tasks. Guy looked very happy, and said to the man in front of him, yes, Your Excellency Commander, I only need 3 tasks, and I can serve the royal family. Wood's congratulations to Guy were very useful. Showing an excited look. Since becoming a centurion, Wood has always been the hardest working person among his colleagues. In just 2 years, he is already very close to the title of knight. Therefore, during the current period of time, Wood has been thinking about becoming a cavalier. For example, what should my surname be called? I choose it myself, and maybe His Majesty the King will bestow one, and not only the surname, but also a family crest. How should I do it? Is it to find someone to set it up? Wood, are you okay? Guy waved his hand in front of his eyes, awakening Wood, who was in deep thought. It's okay, sir. Is there any task for me? Wood wiped the sweat that didn't exist on his forehead, and asked Guy seriously, exactly. I have a task for you. You go to investigate a well-known rich man in London, Cromwell Smith, collect evidence of his crime, and monitor his associates. By the way, he is our main target. Don't startle the snake, let him notice you. Remember to be careful. Guy looked at the door of the office, then closed the door and window with his own hands, came to Wood's side, and whispered into his ear, after all, Cromwell is the richest man in London, and he has a lot of eyeliner, so it's good to be careful. Seeing his boss's cautious appearance, Wood became more cautious in his movements and voice. Okay, my lord, I will go right now, and I will definitely complete the task. With that said, Wood saluted and said goodbye to Guy solemnly, promising with confidence on his face. Watching Wood walk out of his office, and the mood at this time are mixed. In fact, he still has a little envy for this subordinate. Wood had followed him for more than 3 years when he was recruited at the beginning, as long as it was to ensure the safety of his group of people. So he was specially recruited unexpectedly. Among the group of people, Wood, who is the least educated, is about to become the first knight among them. Things are changing. Guy sighed helplessly, and immediately threw himself into the siege of documents at this time. In the suburbs of London, this is a residential area where the middle class gathers together. It was already 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and the sun was struggling to radiate residual heat, trying to warm the vagrants in ragged clothes who were hiding in the corner, and these poor people could only look longingly at a small wooden building not far away. But candles were already lit there, and the whole building looked extraordinarily bright and attractive, especially in this group of standing buildings in the woods. It looks even more outstanding. Few people know that this is a property belonging to the Smith family, a well-known large family in London. But Cromwell Smith, a well-known wealthy businessman in London, was walking anxiously in this brightly lit room at the age of over 50 years old. "Father, go sit down for a while. I'll wait." Cromwell Jr., who is currently the head of the Smith family, looked at his father's anxious appearance and persuaded him softly, "It's nothing, my body can still hold on. This guest is related to the future of our family, I can't be careless." Old Cromwell waved his hand, refusing his son's support, persistently walking around on crutches. "Father, there's nothing wrong with our current salt business. What else can we ask for?" The young Cromwell, who was around 30, frowned, stood behind the old Cromwell, and asked suspiciously, "What do you know? How long can our salt business last? The Hanseatic League in Germany, the Kingdom of Denmark, which one doesn't have the support of the state, the ships they launched recently are getting more and more powerful, but we are still the same. The pressure of competition is too great. While we still have money, we have to change our thinking and regain control of a profitable business." "Father, is this also the reason why you are worrying about our king?" Looking at his father's worried expression, Cromwell Jr. was very interested in the new business he was talking about, and suddenly he remembered a recent incident that didn't fit his father's way of doing things. Chapter 105 Negotiation. "Ah. Yes, how can we meet the great man here without doing something for him first?" Old Cromwell sighed helplessly. The wrinkles on his face seemed to deepen. He shook his head, and turned to look at his confused son. "His Majesty the King has just been in charge, and almost all the power is in the hands of those ministers. Don't look at him a few days ago, he is very prestigious. In fact, he is praised by those ministers." Old Cromwell looked at his son, and didn't want to tell him at first, but after thinking about it, he was very old, and he should know some things. "Think about it, what does a 12-year-old kid know? I'm afraid he doesn't even know how many counties there are in England. How can he convince those ministers who have been domineering for more than 2 years, and until he truly gains power, he will have to wait until he gets married. Therefore, the most powerful right now is the Earl of Warwick." "The Earl of Warwick? Hasn't he been keeping a low profile? I heard he has been reading the Bible at home." Hearing his father say this, even though he was prepared, little Cromwell was still taken aback. It turned out that His Majesty the King, who seemed to have a lot of glory, was being played with by the minister at this time, so he couldn't help but be surprised seeing that his son still looked immature. Old Cromwell felt a bit of bitterness in his heart. "I blame myself for pampering my only son so much that I spent a lot of money to send him to Cambridge University, hoping that he could learn some knowledge." What surprised him was that after several years of study, his son became a devout Protestant and always held a resistant attitude towards doing business at this time. In continental Europe, all universities were run by churches, and theology was the main content of university courses, so Cromwell Jr. could believe in Protestantism. After several years of teaching, he slowly accepted the fact of doing business. But he was completely blind to politics and didn't understand anything. How can a businessman who doesn't care about politics last long? Only now did old Cromwell deeply understand the psychology of hating iron but not steel. Taking a breath, old Cromwell sorted out his mood before speaking slowly. "The Earl of Warwick was able to resist the former Duke Edward for 2 years. What do you think of his power? Now the little king has just taken charge of the government, and he is very angry. He is hiding his strength and biding his time, and he is dormant. He's an old fox, a fox who knows how to hide his tail. I have to beg him." Hearing the news that he didn't know at all, Cromwell Jr. only felt that politics was as dirty as he expected, and he became more determined not to touch politics. "Then why did you invite him to meet here today?" "You'll find out later. Go out now and see if he's here. I'll sit and rest for a while." Old Cromwell glanced at his son, leaned on his crutches, and walked slowly towards the seat, not forgetting to give instructions before leaving. Looking at his father slowly moving back, he could only shake his head. and walked out of the warm wooden house with his feet wearing deerskin boots stepping on the creaking wooden steps. Little Cromwell moved nimbly to the road in front of the wooden house, but at this time, there were 2 young guards standing quietly by the side of the road, staring and looking around. Always keeping an eye on the carriages walking on the road, stamping his feet to warm them up. He felt that the road under his feet was hard, and he was a little panicked. In this kind of area where the middle class lives exclusively, most of the local managers will try their best to arrange it. After all, this place is very close to London. Maybe there is a family that has a close relationship with the powerful ministers in London. Just a casual sentence can determine one's career, but little Cromwell felt that this place was good, the transportation was convenient, and the living environment was quite comfortable. Arranging her cute little sweetheart to come here would definitely make her like it. At this moment, little Cromwell couldn't help but see the happy appearance of his lovely sweetheart, especially her cute little dimples, which made him drunk just looking at her. Master, there is a carriage coming straight over." Just as little Cromwell was thinking about it, the family guard on the side patted his arm and reminded him, "Oh, yes, let me take a look." As he said that, Cromwell Jr. reacted quickly, turned his neck, and saw an ordinary black carriage driving here. Little Cromwell thought it most likely the Earl of Warwick's carriage. After tidying up his appearance, the little Cromwell calmly greeted the slowly stopped carriage. "Very graceful hello, Honorable Earl of Warwick. My father has already been waiting for you in the house." The Earl of Warwick, who had just lifted the curtain of the car, saw a middle-aged man coming up and saluted gracefully. "You're welcome, Cromwell. I've been friends with your father for many years, so don't be so polite in the future." The Earl of Warwick knew at a glance that it was the young Cromwell of the Smith family. He kept smiling and said in a very friendly tone, "Then, Uncle Dudley, let me help you down. Let's go indoors to warm up together." As he spoke, little Cromwell approached the carriage and helped the Earl of Warwick, who was in his 40s, get out of the carriage. Then the two came to open the door together, talking and laughing, and came to the warm wooden house like spring. Hearing the sound of the door opening, the old Cromwell, who was sitting and resting there, quickly got up and greeted him with a cane. "My lord, you are finally here. Please sit down and drink some hot tea to warm up your body." Old Cromwell enthusiastically led the Earl of Warwick towards the chair by the fireplace, not forgetting to worry about the Earl's body. "Phew, Smith. Don't be so polite with me, we are old friends." After taking a sip of hot tea, His Excellency the Earl felt his somewhat icy body warm up quickly, and said to old Cromwell with a smile, "Of course. I will keep in mind the Earl's care for me these years." Old Cromwell said in agreement, all the old age wrinkles on his face gathered together. "Yes, in the past 5 years, I have given you money every year. Of course we have a deep friendship." Little Cromwell, who was waiting aside, kept muttering in his heart, but old Cromwell was talking and laughing happily with the Earl of Warwick at this time, and they seemed to have a very close relationship and were very friendly. "My lord, the Smith family is involved in expanding the glory of God. I don't know what happened." Laughing enough, old Cromwell straightened his face, put away his smile, and started discussing serious business. "It's not easy. You know, His Majesty the King is in charge now. What I can say is not as good as before," Earl Walkery said helplessly, as if he had completely lost power. "Lord Earl, others don't believe in your ability, don't I know? Don't tease me anymore." Hearing that his father had an apologetic smile on his face, Cromwell Jr. knew that his father actually wanted to open up colonies for England and form a colonial company. He didn't expect that his father would be willing to do such a thankless business. Aren't these all ways for those who are too poor to get rich? And their Smith family doesn't say they are rich in London, but they are also among the top rich people in London, so there is absolutely no need to engage in such a project with a low investment rate. While young Cromwell was puzzled, old Cromwell made new progress with the Earl of Warwick. "As long as you do this, I will allow you to participate in the opportunity to spread the glory of God in the New World." Or, the Earl drew a long tone, looking provocatively at the old Cromwell, whose color was constantly changing, observing his reaction. "Or allow your caravan to go to the east, to the place of riches." After seducing old Cromwell, the Earl of Warwick finally uttered a word that made the heart beat faster. "Is what you said true, my Lord Earl?" Old Cromwell asked in disbelief, still digesting this huge and exciting news in his heart. "If you have the recognition of the country and become an official member, even in name, in this age of great voyages full of pirates, the safety factor of cargo ships is much higher than that of ordinary people. Although England's navy is much weaker than Denmark, Spain, and Portugal at this time, as a big country with more than 50 seagoing ships, its deterrent power is still good. Moreover, only with official recognition, the land you occupy is your own and protected by law. Otherwise, The land that was finally acquired can be easily taken away by others, and there is no reason to reason, of course. It depends on your performance to get these. My Mr. Smith, looking at the agitated old Cromwell, the Earl of Warwick smiled contemptuously in his heart, but on the surface he had a serious expression. Okay, I should go too. Looking forward to your performance, Mr. Smith. Okay, Your Excellency the Earl, I'll see you off. Seeing the persistent look on Earl Warwick's face, old Cromwell knew he couldn't keep him in this way. Cromwell and his son sent the Earl of Warwick, who had recovered his simple and honest expression, to the carriage. The two stood on the side of the road like this, watching the carriage gradually go away. Father, why do you have the idea of doing business in the land of those barbarians? Don't you know it's very risky? The business is pretty good now. When the carriage was gone, little Cromwell couldn't bear the doubts in his heart anymore, and asked his father, who was on crutches beside him, don't you know the truth that the greater the risk, the more gold coins? Hey, if it wasn't for you and the family, would I have done this? I'm leaving a retreat for the Smith family. The cold night wind blew on old Cromwell's face, inexplicably bringing him a sense of bleakness. Stop talking, go back, it will be better in the future. As early as the time of Henry VIII, it was stipulated that as long as there is official authorization from England, no matter who it is, as long as he has the ability to occupy and conquer the east, west, and north coasts of the Pacific Ocean, the south coast is the Spanish interest area, where the heathen and barbarians live, even if it is a country, county, or village. As long as he has the ability to occupy and rule that area, he will be officially recognized by England. Chapter 106. What reason do you need to arrest someone? To develop a colony, the most authoritative thing is the king's authorization, followed by the official authorization. Only by obtaining one of the two can we finally guarantee our own interests, of course. These are the businesses of the rich or nobles, and ordinary people can only work for them. Like Columbus discovered the New World, but did he get the colonial land? The lands discovered belonged to the King of Spain, who supported him, and he just got a title of nobility. But Wood didn't want to be the pioneer who discovered the land at this time. He just wanted to be able to get the title of a knight wearing newly bought canvas shoes. Wood walked on the busy streets of London because of the rain that had just rained. The streets were covered with lumps of flat black wet mud. The original stinky street now smells much fresher. Pedestrians just need to pay attention to the potholes on the road. In fact, because the residents living in the city of London are better off than the local people. And everyone loves to be more or less clean, so the front of the houses on both sides of the road is relatively clean, and Wood also walked with a clean floor tiles in front of the house, which made it much more convenient. But you must pay attention to those two-story buildings. Look up at the sky from time to time, otherwise the stool that suddenly falls from the sky will kill you. This journey is a bit long, and it took Wood about half an hour to leave the civilian area and arrive at the aristocratic area. Compared with the civilian area, the aristocratic area is much cleaner. The spacious road can not only accommodate 8 horses passing by at the same time, but also the sewers left by the roadside from the Roman era are still in use today. This is the most important area of the city hall. Moreover, in order to keep the aristocrats clean and tidy, they also specially allocated special funds to arrange for cleaners to clean every day, and gardeners to trim the trees on both sides. And because of the last time the pirates invaded the city of London, the city hall also arranged for the militia to patrol continuously throughout the day. Looking at the neatly dressed Wood, a row of passing militiamen glanced at him for a while and stopped paying attention. But Wood, who didn't know the situation, was frightened by the sight, forced to calm down, and made a fuck gesture at the militiamen who were going away. After adjusting his depressed mood, Wood began to look around. Looking at the neat and lively shops by the road with curious and envious eyes, a bank with 2 white columns, a clothing store with people coming and going, a gold and silver jewelry store that is the favorite of rich ladies and noble girls, and a bustling tavern with its doors open. These are places that Wood is eager to know, and places he has always wanted to go, especially when he thinks that he may live here, and he can come and go at any time, which is really a happy place. Walking around like this, Wood finally came to a hotel that looked very cheap. Opening a door, Wood shook his head when he saw a room without people. Tren, stop playing hide and seek with me, come out soon. As soon as he finished speaking, Wood only felt his eyes flicker, and there was a thin young man in black tights standing in front of him. Hey, Your Excellency Centurion, you are still so boring. The young man shrugged his shoulders, showing an exaggerated look of being defeated by you, which made people laugh. Okay, Tren, don't be kidding. What do I need from you? Okay, Your Excellency the Centurion, seeing Wood's serious expression, Trent also straightened his posture and suppressed his smile. Has anything happened to the Smith family recently? Has that old Cromwell made any moves? Wood found a place to sit down, looked at his most capable men, and asked softly, "My lord, nothing happened within the Smith family, but yesterday a big fish was brought out." Trent pondered for a while, scratched his head, and said inadvertently, but finally seemed to think of something, and said loudly, as if he had picked up a bag of pounds, smiling happily, "Oh, is it? Just tell me, let me see what big fish that old fox in Cromwell can attract." Seeing the surprised appearance of Trent standing in front of him, Wood couldn't help but arouse his curiosity. "Yesterday afternoon, a purchased carriage came out of Cromwell's back door. I didn't pay attention at the time. After all, purchased carriages often come out. However, I just glanced at it suddenly, and felt that the weight of the carriage was much heavier than usual, and the ruts of the carriage were sunken a lot." Looking at Trent, whose face was full of drama, Wood suddenly thought about it and interjected, "It may also be that there are some heavy goods on the carriage." "Impossible, my Excellency Centurion. The car marks this time are much deeper than the car marks I have observed in the past week, far exceeding the record in the past week." "So?" Wood sat up straight and continued, "So I asked another brother to take my place. I followed the carriage closely and refused to lose track for a second from time to time." Thrun deliberately described the difficult problems and unbearable hardships when he was tracking, and told Wood a lot of bitterness. "Okay, you are the vice captain now. It happens that one of the captains is unwell and can't continue working. If you do well this time, I will recommend you to the commander-in-chief." Wood smiled helplessly, and then said something that made Trent tremble all over. "Yes, Sir Commander. This time, the carriage I followed did not go to the market as usual, but left the city of London and came to a residential area, and to my surprise, it was the Cromwells and his sons who got off the carriage, not the butler who made the purchase." Then I waited nearby. The weather was so cold, and I was wearing very thin clothes, so I was so cold, I knew the urgency of the mission. I vowed not to leave. Seeing Wood's face becoming more and more ugly, Thrun hurriedly turned the corner in his words. "Just when I was about to lose my patience, another carriage came. I looked carefully, and to my surprise, it was the Earl of Warwick who got out of the carriage." "What? Is this real? Are you sure?" Hearing this, Wood couldn't sit still any longer, and jumped up directly, holding Trent's collar tightly with both hands, with an extremely excited expression. "Your Excellency the Centurion, relax, I'm almost out of breath." Wood looked at Trent, who was blushing from the corner of his eye, and let go of his hand in embarrassment, only then remembered that his subordinate was quite thin. "Well, Trent, keep talking, ahem. All right, Your Excellency the Centurion, I'm sure it's the Earl of Warwick." "It's him." Thrun stretched his neck and looked at Wood speechlessly. "Very good, this is very good, Trent, your captain is sure to be this time." Hearing this, Wood happily walked up and down the room, muttering something from time to time, and he knew that the knight was right in front of him. After about a minute, Wood slowly recovered under the eyes of Trent, who seemed to be mentally retarded. "So, what did they talk about?" Wood wanted to continue digging. "No, seeing this, I couldn't bear it any more, so I came back." Thrun spread his hands and said, "Okay. You continue to monitor. I'll go first." Wood said in a hurry. Immediately, Wood passed the news to Guy, and Guy brought the news to Edward, who was eating. "Okay, I got it." Edward, who was eating, only said this, and then started his interrupted meal. Guy, who was reporting at the side, was a little confused and couldn't figure out what Edward meant, so he could only wait for Edward to finish his meal. After eating, Edward directly pulled Guy into the study and listened to him explain the details in detail. "You immediately organize all the people in London. Didn't I send you some clothes for Darkblade a while ago? Let them wear this clothes now, and then arrest those unscrupulous businessmen. They must wear that clothes. This is the time to establish the majesty of your dark blades." Hearing this sentence, Guy felt an uncontrollable excitement in his heart. The Dark Blade department is so non-existent that any nobleman can easily tease him, regardless of his status as the leader of the Dark Blade. "Then, what about the Earl of Warwick?" Guy asked nervously. "Catch it together, don't be afraid, he's just an earl, I'll back you up." Edward thought for a while, then said directly, with a very free and easy tone, "Then what charges are you arresting him for? What reason do you need to arrest someone? You can just find anyone. As long as you catch him, there are as many reasons as you want." Hearing Edward's rogue words, Guy was speechless, but it made sense after thinking about it. After leaving Whitehall Palace, Guy went directly to the headquarters because of the preparations in advance. There were hundreds of people standing densely in front of the villa at this time, tall, Short, fat, and thin, but overall they looked full of momentum. Take a closer look. Everyone is wearing a tall hat specially designed for them by Edward, which is different from the ordinary tall hats sold on the street. The hat is woven of fine linen and has a flat style, referring to Captain Jack the Pirate. With a golden brim and a lion symbolizing royal power and majesty in the center of the front of the hat, everyone was wearing a blood-red cloak, with an angel with wings embroidered on the surface of the cloak, wearing a scarlet shirt on the upper body, and a black jacket on the outside. The lower body is white trousers, blue and white stockings, and moccasin boots. A dagger with sheath hangs on the left side of the waist, and an iron waist card with personal information written in English on the right side. Generally speaking, the team of nearly 400 people is uniformly dressed, and it looks like an elite team walking to the front of the whole team. Guy is full of style, and he looks like the boss at first glance. However, the weather at this time did not give face, and it began to rain sporadically. Guy said he was used to the weather in London. Brothers, tonight is our chance to show our talents, and also our chance to stand out. The time to repay His Majesty the King is now. Long live His Majesty the King! Long live His Majesty the King! Long live His Majesty the King! The people below also shouted in unison, looking at the sun that was about to set. Guy said loudly, "Today, as long as you complete His Majesty's mission, not only can you recruit a special mission point, but each of you can get a reward of £5. For His Majesty the King." As if to stimulate enthusiasm, Guy brought out a cash reward again for His Majesty the King. This time the voice of shouting became even louder, soaring into the sky. Chapter 107 Capture. Guy looked at his highly motivated subordinates, nodded in satisfaction, and then waved his hand. Set off. Boom, boom, boom. The buckskin boots of nearly 400 Dark Blade members slapped the ground, making a heart-beating sound. Tron, you go with me to catch Cromwell and his son. You are more familiar there. Yes, Your Excellency the Commander. Thron waved helplessly at his immediate superior, showing an involuntary expression in his boss, the centurion Duark, was trembling with a fat face, and he knew without guessing that his boss had cut off the fattest piece of meat, and it was done in a fair manner. Seeing Tron walking slowly past, Duark could only clench his fists, thinking in his mind which one would be more cost-effective to capture. According to Guy's plan, only the 7 most important businessmen need to be arrested. The 7 members of the city council are all on a first-come, first-served basis, and the centurions are free to snatch them. And in the end, the large group gathered together to capture the big character, the Earl of Warwick. Guy took Tron directly to the edge of the noble area. It is reasonable for Cromwell and his son not to live in the aristocratic district, but both of them have the title of city councillors, and they have changed from wealthy businessmen to the rulers of London, so it is only natural that they should live in the aristocratic district. In the aristocratic area, the residence of the Smith family is located on the edge of the aristocratic area, so it is very close to the common people's living area. Only 1 street away, because the location is not good, the price is cheap, and the Smith family is not short of money, so the entire house covers an exaggerated 100 acres. The layout of the house is that the garden is in the front, the owner's residential area is in the middle, and the servants and pets live on both sides. Therefore, Guy, who had never been here before, closed his mouth in surprise, stared at the garden full of flowers and plants with blurred eyes, and his legs stopped unconsciously. In fact, this is not his fault. In the aristocratic district, even in the fringe area of the aristocratic district, the land price per acre has reached £5 per acre. It can be said that this nearly 100 acres of garden grass alone is worth £5 beside Guy. The entire net worth of more than a dozen people. Seeing the neatly arranged and closed small boxes, Guy didn't know that this was the legendary honeycomb that could produce honey. Brothers, rush with me, but remember one thing, none of the property inside can be touched, even if you have your life to take it. You can't spend your life. After recovering, Guy wiped the drool from the corner of his mouth, raised his hand, and all the subordinates behind him also stopped, listening to his boss's orders seriously. Okay. Come with me. Glancing at the nodding crowd, Guy let go of his nervous heart. Dang dang. Guy knocked on the door. Here we come. We come. My master won't be seeing guests tonight. A servant in his 30s opened the door muttering, and stared at the dagger on his neck with his round eyes. Well, do you know who my master is? It's so presumptuous. I don't want to live. Looking at Guy in a strange costume in front of him, the male servant, who was stunned for a while, finally reacted from his fear, then opened his throat, raised his chin, and said in a contemptuous tone, I just know where this is, so I came here. Guy patted the servant's face with the back of his knife and said domineeringly, take him down, don't let him escape. Maybe this guy is an accomplice. Throwing the man in front of him to trend behind him, Guy walked straight in, followed by his subordinates. Seeing the menacing Guy group, the maids and servants along the way hurriedly discarded the items in their hands and ran around in panic. Of course, there were also people who did not know what to do and wanted to drive Guy and the others away, but they were not the opponents of Guy and his group, and they settled down easily. And this was the scene of the servants fleeing in panic, pushing open the door of the room. Guy, who had been in the dark for a long time, couldn't stand the light of the candles for a while, especially the large number of candles shining, squinting his eyes. Guy quickly blocked it with his hand. After a while, the eyes got used to it. When they opened their eyes, they saw that Cromwell and his son were standing behind 20 or 30 strong servants, smoking cigars. Who are you? Don't you know that this is the residence of the Smith family of the city councillor? I advise you to leave quickly, or wait until— You mean the London militia? Unfortunately, they may not come. Looking at the young Cromwell, who was talking eloquently and trying to threaten him, Guy couldn't help seeing him upset, and interrupted him with a sneer. At this time, the militiamen who were called for help by other attacked members of Parliament had just been dispatched. After a while, Andre, the special envoy sent by Edward, came to the militia's barracks with a nervous face. Major Prior, His Majesty the King is being attacked by a group of gangsters. Hurry up and protect His Majesty, Andre said anxiously and panting to the militia Major Prior, who was riding on the horse and had just left the barracks. Seeing Andre coming on horseback, Prior knew him, a servant of His Majesty the King. Well, Andre, I will send half of the people to rescue His Majesty the King immediately, and the rest will go to rescue other city councillors later. Regarding Andre, the servant who often accompanied Edward, Prior very respectful, but the London militia has only 300 men in standing, and only when there are not enough men are recruited from the citizens. It stands to reason that Prior is under the leadership of the Parliament, but his major position was appointed by the King himself, so he seemed a little hesitant. My Mr. Major, the safety of His Majesty the King is the most important thing. No one else can compare. You have to think clearly. If something happens to His Majesty, can you take responsibility? Not only your position as a major, but even your life will disappear. Andre became more and more fluent in his speech, and his tone became more and more serious. Finally, he made a gesture of wiping Major Prior's neck, which scared Major Prior into cold sweat. Okay. After a deep struggle in his heart, between life and position, he still chose life. Brothers, let's go. Only then did Prior remember that he didn't know where His Majesty the King was currently living. Well, Andre, I don't know where His Majesty the King is currently being attacked by thieves, Prior asked with some embarrassment. At Hampton Court Palace by the Thames. Let's go quickly. Riding on a horse, Andre urged in an anxious tone. Okay. Brothers, go to Hampton Court Palace, called by Prior. The militiamen changed their direction in unison at random steps, heading south to Hampton Court Palace. At this time, in the brightly lit room, Guy's indifferent attitude made the hearts of Cromwell and his son tremble, and blew out any luck in their hearts. Guy didn't say any more, and called his subordinates to rush forward, and a small scuffle began. In less than 10 minutes, Guy captured Cromwell and his son at the cost of 3 deaths and 16 injuries, and those trained bodyguards and servants also paid the price of 9 deaths and 10 injuries. Mr. Cromwell, let me tell you, the person who came to arrest you today is the department under the royal family. Dark Blade, looking at the Cromwell and his son who were tied to the ground, Guy couldn't help pointing at his clothes and said loudly, from now on, we Dark Blade will make you illegal businessmen tremble when you hear this name. You can't walk when you see this suit. Squatting, Guy tugged at the blood-colored cloak floating behind him, and said in an arrogant tone, unable to hide the pride on his face. Half an hour later, the rest of the Dark Blade team slowly gathered beside the Earl of Warwick's mansion, and the entire team had expanded to more than 600 people. Among them, the dejected businessmen and their family members who were tied up with ropes belonged to the extra 200 people. Leave dozens of people outside to guard these criminals later, and the rest will go to the Earl's mansion with me. Looking at the assembled crowd, Guy ordered things like this, and all the people present nodded in agreement. Okay, everyone, come in with me. With that said, Guy walked towards the Earl of Warwick's mansion in a hurry, and knocked on the door himself. He didn't know what news he had received beforehand, but the door was tightly closed, and no one answered. No matter how hard he knocked, Guy felt a little strange, so he called everyone to hit the gate together. After a while, the gate of the Earl's mansion was forcibly opened, but Guy and the others who came in could not see a single figure. Oops. It must be that our movement is too loud. He has noticed something. Guy patted his thigh and said regretfully, everyone, look for any clues, and Tren, take a few people to find the brothers we are monitoring nearby. My lord, do you doubt? Yes, that's right, those brothers are probably killed. Guy's face was a little ugly, and he said in a heavy tone, going back to half an hour ago. The Earl of Warwick, who was eating, was shocked when he got the news that several London city councillors had been stormed into their homes by a group of people others don't know, members of the Dark Blade. But how can he, a member of the Privy Council, not know him? In particular, several centurions in London are familiar to them. Hearing the introduction of these thugs, the Earl of Warwick was suddenly taken aback. He felt that this matter was strange. Putting down the bread in his hand, the Earl of Warwick hastily ordered the butler who was standing by, "My lady, pack up your clothes right away. We're going back to our hometown of Northumberland now, only 10 minutes, get ready." After hearing the message from his secret agent, the Earl of Warwick said directly to the lady who was dining with him, "My housekeeper, prepare the carriage immediately. My wife, the young masters and I are going back to Northumberland. Also, call the guards I recruited a while ago, they want to go back with me." As the Earl walked, he gave instructions to the housekeeper. His hasty pace showed his anxiety. "That's right. You send someone to kill the few little flies around the mansion. Hurry up." The Earl, who had just climbed the stairs, turned around and said to the butler who was about to leave, "Okay, sir. I will obey your orders." The butler bowed to greet him. Chapter 108 Escape. 10 minutes later, the Northumberlands were ready to go. Because the Earl of Warwick was a soldier, he had always had a strong personality, so he kept his word at home, and no one dared to disobey it. Looking at the Countess standing beside him, as well as several adult sons and daughters-in-law, the Count nodded in satisfaction. "John, Robert hasn't come back yet? How about we wait a while?" The Countess is a lady of country jazz origin. Even though she has become a countess, her dress is still relatively simple as always, and her personality is very soft, which matches the Earl of Warwick's tough personality. Looking at his wife, the Earl of Warwick shook his head and said, "Anna, don't wait for him. He is in His Majesty's guard camp. He is safe." Hearing what her husband said, Mrs. Anna's heart was broken. No matter how ignorant she was, she knew that her husband must be in big trouble if he left overnight. Otherwise, with his status as identified Earl, would he still want to run away? "Okay, Anna, don't worry, Robert will be fine. Let's go first." The Count put his right hand on Mrs. Anna's shoulder, and comforted her softly in her ear. Well, I'm fine, it's fine, let's go, Mrs. Anna wiped her red eyes and said softly, "Let's go, Northumberland." With the Earl of Warwick's shout, 5 carriages lightly loaded on the road began to set sail, heading for the London dock. 5 miles away there, a medium-sized merchant ship was waiting for the Earl of Warwick at the dock. Northumberland is the northernmost county in England. Its capital is Newcastle. It borders the North Sea to the east and Scotland to the north. It is also the hometown of the Earl of Warwick. In history, the Earl of Warwick will also create himself the Duke of Northumberland. So when Guy and his party came to the Earl's mansion, they saw an empty room and 2 corpses lifting off the linen covering the corpse. Guy kept looking at the 2 young corpses lying on the ground without saying a word. After watching for about 10 seconds, he stretched out his hand and pulled up the linen to cover the bloody corpse. "So, bury them well," Guy said calmly. For Guy, starting from becoming the leader of the Dark Blade, there are few lives in the reports that come to him every month. For these, for Guy, he is used to it. "Boss, we found the ruts of the carriage," a report broke the sad atmosphere of the crowd. "Okay, everyone chase after me," Guy said happily after hearing the news. Thanks to the weather in London, it had not been an hour since a light rain fell and the ruts were still visible on the road. In this way, the mighty army began to chase the Earl of Warwick's convoy again, but they forced the prisoners hard. They had just been beaten, and now they were about to run long distances again. After a while, Guy found that these pampered prisoners were panting after running for less than a mile, which slowed down the pace of the whole army at once. "Find dozens of people to escort these merchants back." "Yes, Your Excellency." The commander, Thrun, grimaced and agreed reluctantly. Guy also has his own thoughts in doing this. Today, Thrun performed very well, but he should not be too dazzling. After all, he is just a small vice-captain. After about 20 minutes, Guy finally followed the traces of the carriage to the London pier. However, Guy only saw 5 empty carriages parked on the pier, and the scattered dock workers passed by with envious eyes. Just as he was about to approach, an official who seemed to be in charge of the dock came over. "Hey, you untouchables, do you want to die? This is something from the noble lord, don't get close to it." The official looks like a small official, but his attitude is quite arrogant, and his expression is very arrogant. "We are members of the Star Chamber Court, and we are ordered to track down important criminals. Let me ask you, Where are the owners of these carriages? Seeing this, not wanting to waste any more time, Guy directly picked up his badge and asked the little official. Since Edward formed the dark blade, he was afraid that the dark blade would not have a deterrent effect, so he nominally affiliated the dark blade to the door of the Star Chamber Court, which is full of deterrents, so that it is much more convenient to do things I'm so sorry. I didn't expect the arrival of the adults. I am the tax collector Cade here. The clothes of the main adults are quite strange. The little official stuttered a little, and looked at Guy in disbelief, but he couldn't stop the timidity on his face. Okay, I just want to ask you, where is the owner of these carriages? The Earl of Warwick. Guy didn't bother to care about what he was thinking. At this moment, he just wanted to know where his target, the Earl of Warwick, had gone. Here, half an hour ago, the Earl of Warwick came to the pier and said he was going to Southampton, so he left on a merchant ship. The tax collector looked at Guy with some fear, and told the details in detail. Smelly bitch. So, can we send someone to catch up now? After cursing, Guy looked expectantly at the tax collector in front of him. Well, my lord. It's dark now, and the Earl of Warwick may have already left the port. Soon, he will reach the sea along the Thames, and we will not be able to catch up. Then you immediately send someone to chase after him. If you don't chase him, how do you know you won't catch up? Seeing the Lord of the Star Chamber Court so messing around, the tax collector at the pier felt a bit of a headache at this moment. He wished he could slap himself in the face, because he blamed himself for talking too much. It was purely self-inflicted trouble. My lord, I'm so sorry. There's no boat tonight, the tax collector said a word weakly, afraid that he would be taken away. After all, he was not clean at all. After listening to this sentence, Guy felt that his eyes were filled with gold stars, and he was about to explode with anger. Let's go. Let's go back. After leaving these words, Guy turned around and walked away with a face full of unwillingness. My lord, please go slowly. Looking at the group of gays who were gradually going away, the tax collector blessed him from behind. Guy's face trembled, showing a dumbfounding expression at this time. Andre, who brought the London militia, came to Hampton Palace on the banks of the Thames. Looking at the good Hampton Court Palace in the dark, staying there quietly, Militia Major Pryor could not know that he was cheated. Andre, don't think that you can act recklessly because you are a servant of His Majesty the King. If something happens to the MPs, you will be wanted by the London City Hall. As soon as the congressman knew that it was his ineffective rescue, those businessmen would definitely remove him from his post, and maybe even bribe the judge to punish him with such a terrible scene in his heart. Pryor hated Andre for deceiving him even more. Seeing Pryor's wolf-like eyes, as if he wanted to tear himself alive, Andre couldn't help shivering. My major, it doesn't matter how much you hate me now, but you have to think about your current situation. The businessmen of the London City Council will definitely not let you, a militia major who betrayed their interests. Hearing Andre tell his dangerous situation, Andre's face turned paler and paler. However, there's a life in front of you. I don't know if you cherish it or not. Andre's words directly whetted Pryor's appetite, making his heart itch. Andre, what vitality are you talking about? Pryor swallowed and asked nervously. Your Majesty, your vitality is His Majesty the King. Andre said word by word. Your Majesty? Pryor was a little surprised. It's His Majesty the King, the whole of London. The one who dares to offend His Majesty the King. Not only your life, but even your current position can be preserved. Andre is like a devil who tempts to commit crimes, and he lures the wandering Pryor with sweet wine. Okay, let's go. I am willing to serve the great His Majesty. Edward, then, please tell me, how can His Majesty save me? Seeing Pryor's appointed appearance, Andre finally smiled. Don't worry, my major, you will know tomorrow. After speaking, Andre put on his hat and rode away. Directly looking at Andre going away, Major Pryor had a complex expression on his face. Late at night, the noisy street during the day is like a gentle girl, full of a different kind of poetry, which is pleasing to the Whitehall Palace. At this time, His Majesty the King of England did not sleep or read a book as usual, but was admiring the portrait of his grandfather Henry VIII. Henry VIII on horseback wore the armor of an ordinary general. But he still couldn't stop his kingly majesty in front of the horse. A group of local gentlemen bowed their heads and surrendered to the King of England. Just when Edward was about to be filled with emotion, Guy came. Your Majesty, London City Councillor Cromwell and his family members have been arrested, and they are now sent to the detention center of the Star Chamber Court. Guy said to Edward somewhat unnaturally. Really? What about the Earl of Warwick? Edward felt a little abnormal when he heard Guy's tone. Your Majesty, I am very sorry about this matter. The old fox of the Earl of Warwick has escaped, Guy lowered his head and said in shame, when the credits are recorded later, your credits will be forfeited. When Edward heard the news, he said directly in front of Guy, yes, Your Majesty. Guy agreed helplessly. So many people, how much money did they copy in total? Edward asked directly without changing his face, without a hint of embarrassment in his tone. Your Majesty, according to calculations, we have obtained a total of £120,000, 30,000 acres of land deeds, more than 100 shops, banks, companies, real estate, etc. have not yet been calculated. As soon as this was mentioned, Guy beamed with joy. This was a bonus item for him. Very good, very good. I will reward you with £100, and I will send Luna to help you count together. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelists. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 109, Harvest. After saying the words of reward, Edward turned around and left, returned to his room and started to sleep. And Guy can only leave Whitehall Palace with mixed feelings and return to his residence the next day. In the lively London neighborhood, details of last night began to flow out like people in any capital city. The commoners and citizens of London love to talk politics, especially about the life of His Majesty the King. Like all pubs, Papa Beth's, in the heart of the borough, is always full of talkative people. No, before 9 o'clock, dozens of people gathered in the bar more than 100 feet away, making the eyes of the bar owner, Papa Bess, squint into a line sitting in the wine cabinet. Papa Beth had a glass of barley wine in front of him. He pricked up his ears and listened carefully to the bragging of a middle-aged man with a loud voice in the center of the crowd. The reason why I say it is bragging is because Papa Beth is not too familiar with this middle-aged man with his brown curly hair and blue eyes. Common in Anglo-Saxon England, he was notable for his stature in this era when common people are generally thin. Only nobles, local gentlemen and rich businessmen are entitled to the title of fat, but this middle-aged man has a plump figure than ordinary people. And he also has a rosacea nose that is typical of alcoholics. Papa Beth knew that the middle-aged man was called Peter, and he was nicknamed Alcoholic Peter because a relative is a judge of the Star Chamber Court. He was taken care of as a small dock worker leader at the dock. He had nothing to do all day long, and he liked to hang out in his bar. Let me tell you, I didn't blow it. Last night, I saw with my own eyes a group of people, a large group of people wearing red cloaks. Peter made exaggerated movements to describe the number of people he saw that night, which can be said to be full of emotion. You haven't seen it? They have terrible runes on their clothes, and masks made of human bones on their faces. Everyone holds a thick thigh bone in their hands, and they look eerie. Hearing Peter's description, the audience present took a breath of air, and Peter also showed a frightened face at the right time, which seemed to highlight the horror of that night even more. I just followed behind and watched them walk to Mr. Cromwell's mansion step by step, directly killing all the servants who blocked the way and the servants passing by on the way, and killed all the way to Mr. Cromwell's room. Captured Cromwell and his son. After they left, the whole mansion was filled with blood. Seeing this, I ran home in a hurry. Sober, Peter patted his chest, and said in a fluke tone, which involuntarily increased everyone's trust in him, okay, for the sake of this glass of wine, I will say that much. If you want to know more, unless you have another glass. Seeing the convinced expressions of the group of people around him, Peter directly drank the large glass of barley wine in front of him, shook his head and said, "Cut, you're almost drunk, you're still drinking." When the audience heard that Peter still wanted to drink after the end, they all dispersed and went to drink. Peter touched his big wine-red nose, shook his head helplessly, then walked to the counter, looked at Papa Bess with a teasing expression, and said loudly, "Father, bring me another glass of wine to calm me down." "Hey, Peter, you were very brave last night." Papa Beth filled the empty glass in front of him, his tone full of ridicule. "Hey, it's just to tease these bumpkins. Let's get a glass of wine." By the way, Peter drank a third of a glass of wine in one breath, belched, and said indifferently, "However, I do know who those people who showed their power last night were. Oh, these have aroused my interest. Let's talk about it." Peter's mysterious appearance successfully aroused Papa Beth's interest, and he couldn't help asking. Peter didn't speak, but just silently looked at the wine glass in front of him. Papa Beth smiled, picked up the small wine barrel and filled his glass directly. "Very good. According to my relative, last night, Dark Blade sent a group of prisoners, and they were held in the Star Chamber Court." Peter nodded in satisfaction, then took another sip. "It seems that this organization called Dark Blade is very powerful." Papa Bass sighed. That's right, killing people without blinking an eye. Peter responded casually, dividing line. At this time, His Majesty Edward, who had slept very late last night, finally woke up under the service of Lucy. Edward dressed, washed, and appeared in the mirror in high spirits. Lucy, has anyone asked to see me? Edward asked while admiring himself in the mirror. Your Majesty, early in the morning, Archbishop Thomas has come to see you. However, I let him rest and wait in the living room on the grounds that you are still resting. Lucy heard Edward's question and replied with a hint of playfulness. Okay. Take me to see him. Edward said casually without thinking. You haven't eaten yet. Why don't you go and have dinner first before meeting him? Okay, I'll go eat first, and then let it cool down, my dear Bishop. Edward rolled his eyes when he heard Lucy's persuasion, and then chose to eat again in the living room. The elderly Bishop Thomas was fidgeting. Since hearing what happened last night, he has been in a bad mood. He didn't expect that the little king would be so resolute, and within a few days of taking office, he won the 7 most influential MPs in London. What's even more intriguing is that although there is no direct evidence to prove that the Earl of Warwick was scared away by the little king, it is true that the dark blade rushed to the Earl's mansion afterwards. This incident made him feel a little terrified. He inexplicably thought of Henry VIII, the king who killed the Queen and his courtiers at will, and his strong personality caused headaches. Having stayed here for a while, the bishop has been thinking about how to persuade the little king to cancel the hunt for the Earl of Warwick, especially now that he has fled. The tacit understanding among the nobles cannot be interrupted, nor can England lose face. As the thinking continued in time past, the bishop's face became more and more ugly. At this moment, His Majesty the King, who had had a full meal, finally came to the living room and met Archbishop Thomas, who had been waiting for a long time. Good day, my lord. Good day, my lord Bishop. After greeting each other, the two sat on chairs facing each other. After a moment of silence, Bishop Thomas took the lead to break the atmosphere. My lord, the Earl of Warwick left London unexpectedly last night. You know that? Yes, I just got the news. I'm also very curious about this. Edward took the words smoothly, showing a puzzled expression very cooperatively. I don't know why, but this is really intriguing. Bishop Thomas twitched the corners of his mouth for Edward, who was acting stupid in front of him. Your Majesty, the Earl of Warwick has worked tirelessly for the royal family, and he deserves a lot. Yes, my lord Bishop, I thought of the Duke of Somerset. He also worked hard for the royal family, but he was attacked by a group of pirates. Fortunately, nothing happened, but yesterday it was him. Tomorrow it may be you and me. For our safety, don't you think the Home Rule Council in London should be abolished? Edward did not take the bishop's words, and got involved with a London self-government committee. Hearing Edward's words, Bishop Thomas knew that this was Edward's condition. If he did not agree to this request, the Earl of Warwick would probably be wanted in the next moment. Yes, you are quite right. The London self-government committee should indeed be abolished. The management of London by a group of businessmen is terrible. Bishop Thomas readily agreed to this request. As a believer in God, he looked down on businessmen from the bottom of his heart, even if they donate a large sum of pounds to the Church of England every year. Edward was not surprised by Bishop Thomas's straightforward agreement, and everyone felt no psychological burden of betraying other people's interests. Also, haven't you noticed? Is the efficiency of the Regency Council very low? Besides, this is not in line with England's tradition. Edward did not easily agree to Bishop Thomas to forgive the Earl of Warwick, nor did he refuse, but said a word silently. When Bishop Thomas heard these words, his heart was churning, and there was an indescribable feeling in his heart. He didn't expect that the little king in front of him had such a big appetite, and he wanted to remove the obstacles to power all at once, and in this way, there will be no checks and balances on the king's rights, and he will become like Henry VIII, unscrupulous, and even he will be terrified. However, if you don't agree, sooner or later the little king will take power himself in a few years, and the attitude towards his religious reform will become a problem. Seeing Bishop Thomas, who was silent for a while, Edward didn't know what struggle he was going to have, so Edward just waited silently. 10 minutes later, Bishop Thomas' eyes began to converge again, and his spirit became a little decadent, sighing. The bishop said helplessly, "Of course, the establishment of the Regency Council is against the traditions of England. It is to assist you in ruling England. At present, I believe that your ability is already capable of governing England, and the Regency Council can be abolished." After saying these words, it seemed that Archbishop Thomas had exhausted his strength, and his face was full of exhaustion. Hearing what Bishop Thomas said, Edward smiled with satisfaction. "Don't worry, there's nothing wrong with the Earl of Warwick, it's just that a businessman has falsely accused him. I have ordered Darkblade to investigate, and I will definitely return the Earl's innocence, Edward promised with righteous words. Chapter 110 Appointment. In this way, Edward sent the staggering Bishop Thomas to the carriage at this time. He was very happy, but he didn't show it. What he needed most at this time was calmness. After all, he was a king, so he still needed face with pleasant steps. Edward came to a large room full of fairy tales. The whole room is made up of red, white and pink, with stickers of various colors and portraits of animals all over the walls. The animal toys made of cloth and stuffed with wool are randomly placed on the ground, either upside down or upside down, in different poses, and a 6 or 7-year-old girl, wearing a pink giraffe suit, was sitting on the ground covered with a quilt, playing with a doll in her hand. The little girl muttered from time to time, but her hands kept moving. Her round face looked extremely cute. Edward walked quietly behind the little girl, and with his eyes stopped the movement that Casey wanted to remind. Guess who I am? Edward stretched out his hands from behind to cover little Mary's eyes, and deliberately changed his voice up. It must be Brother Edward, only your fingernails are very short, while Sister Luna and Sister Lucy have very long nails. Little Mary bit her index finger, moved her eyebrows, and said in a delicate voice, haha. Mary is getting smarter and smarter, what a good girl. Edward had no choice but to remove his palm, walked slowly in front of her, scraped his delicate little nose, and praised, of course, Mary is the smartest, even Brother Edward can't compare to me. As soon as little Lolita was praised by Edward, she was very proud, her neck was held high, and her small eyes were narrowed into a small slit. Come on, Brother Edward made another fun thing for you, get up, let's go play together. Edward squatted in front of little Lolita, stroking her soft long hair, and said in a doting tone, okay. Okay. Little Lolita clapped her hands happily. In little Mary's impression, Brother Edward is the best and smartest. He can change anything, delicious and fun. So, she got up quickly, picked up the doll in her hand, and followed Edward out of the room with a smile on her face, holding little Lolita's little hand. Edward led her to the lawn in the backyard. As soon as she arrived in the backyard, little Mary saw a spacious chair suspended between two big trees. The chair was fixed in the middle of the big trees by a hemp rope, and it swayed from side to side with the wind blowing, which was very interesting. Brother Edward, won't this chair fall off? Asked little Mary, pointing to a chair. Come on, let's sit on it and try it, don't you know? Mary dares. Edward looked at the little lolly, who was a little naturally dumbfounded, rubbed her hair, and asked HMPH. Brother Edward underestimates people, whoever dares. Let's go up. Little lolly snorted, and walked to the hanging chair with a proud look. Edward walked over with a funny smile, hugged little Lolita on the chair at once, and then sat on it himself. Casey, help me push it from behind. Edward tried it, and felt that the hanging chair could not move much with his own strength, and then ordered Casey, who looked worried. Oh. Yes, Your Majesty. Casey was stunned for a moment, then reacted, walked over quickly, and stretched out his hand to push. Sitting on the hanging chair, Edward felt that he was about to fly, and a childhood feeling flooded into Edward's heart. Whoa. Whoa. Come on, work hard, Aunt Kathy. At the first push, Mary still had her eyes closed, but at the second time, little Lolita screamed excitedly. Her little face was red, her eyes were wide open, and her long eyelashes twinkled. Very cute. Edward looked at the excited little lolly, smiled knowingly, and with a push of the hanging chair, he flew to the high sky with his full heart. The next day, under the auspices of Edward, a new meeting of the Regency Council was held. Under the proposal of Bishop Thomas and the consent of many ministers, the Regency Council, which was born in 1547, was officially abolished. Moreover, there is also a legal form that stipulates that no one, including the successor king, may re-establish the Regency Council in any form or in any name. After the decision of this meeting was promulgated, everyone's jaws were shocked. What is even more surprising is that, on the second day after the abolition of the Regency Council, under the auspices of Edward, the meeting of the Privy Council was officially announced under the auspices of the great King Edward. This meeting, adhering to the needs of the general welfare of the people of England and the safety of London's citizens, abolished the right of London city self-government through the proposal of the Duke of Houghton. This proposal was agreed by most of the Privy Council ministers, and Faris Alexander, the Speaker of the Privy Council and Chancellor of the Exchequer, also took the lead in speaking, firmly supporting Duke Houghton's proposal. For the safety of the majority of London citizens, the abolition of the London Self-Government Committee is a matter of course. All the ministers also agreed with Duke Houghton's proposal, and agreed that the London Home Rule Committee did not pay attention to the safety of London citizens and was irresponsible in this way. The self-government rights that London merchants had worked hard for were completely swept away, and London was once again bathed in the glory of His Majesty the King. The Earl of Warwick's departure from home, which attracted people's attention, was neither discussed nor explained. So it was forgotten by many ministers, but privately it was said that His Majesty the King himself had promised to keep the Earl of Warwick absolved of all matters, except that he would not be allowed to come to London again. Some people even said that King Edward sent the Dark Blade Killer who had been in the limelight a while ago to hunt down and kill the Earl of Warwick himself, and completely killed the Earl's family. There are different opinions about this gossip, and it is not known whether it is true or not. However, a major event related to the livelihood of Londoners has attracted the attention of those citizens in London. Privy Councillor and Secretary of State William Cecil is about to become London's first royally appointed Lord Mayor. In fact, before Edward made this decision, he went through some careful consideration. In the history of England, William Cecil was a famous statesman, the main advisor during the reign of Elizabeth I was also a talent in governing the country during the Renaissance. According to the original historical situation, during the period of Edward VI, he would have served as the chief minister of state and be in charge of the Privy Council, and in 1558, after Elizabeth ascended the throne, she became her only secretary. What made him famous in Europe began with England's defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588. When the Armada approached, Cecil began to plan for the upcoming war from all aspects of politics, military affairs and diplomacy. Henry IV and James VI of Scotland, and closely watched the movements of Catholics in England and Scotland. On the one hand, they prepared for war in terms of manpower and material resources. The British Army defeated the Spanish Armada in the naval battle, which is inseparable from Cecil's careful arrangements before the war. Therefore, Edward cherishes this talent like Ziohe in the future. In order to train this future capable minister, Edward specially arranged for him to roast on the stove of the Mayor of London, because London at this time is like a fire that has just been extinguished, and under the stimulation of the sun, it will be revived at any time. To be honest, the citizens of London took the right of self-government from the king together. Although Edward borrowed a little mistake, the ministers of the United Privy Council unilaterally took back the right of self-government. However, since William the Conqueror granted London self-government in 1066, for 500 years, the citizens of London have been accustomed to the jurisdiction of the City Council and have never been constrained by the king. Even though the successive kings of England spent most of their time in London, not only will the citizens resent the king's rule, but the businessmen who have lost their rights will not just watch their rights being lost in their own hands. Therefore, the citizens living in London are very likely to unite with the merchants who used to greedily exploit them to restore London's autonomy instead of living freely and happily bathed in the glory of His Majesty the King. William Cecil came to Whitehall Palace the day before he took up his duties to meet Edward. Your loyal servant, William Cecil, King of England and Ireland, King of France. This meeting was relatively formal, so both Edward and Cecil were dressed in splendid attire, and the meeting ceremony was quite grand. On the day William Cecil officially took office, the Palace of Westminster held an unprecedented inauguration ceremony. Originally, there was no trace of the inauguration ceremony of the Mayor of London, but the ministers also agreed that it should be a big one, and Edward also believed that holding a grand ceremony would help to demonstrate the royal power. Therefore, in the hall of the Palace of Westminster, the appointment and removal ceremony officially began with many ministers, London nobles, wealthy London businessmen, and members of Congress as the audience. First of all, the 50-member Royal Orchestra played cheerful music to render this unforgettable day. After that, Edward slowly came to the steps of the hall, and William Cecil came to Edward with a serious face and knelt down on one knee. This is according to the method discussed by Edward and Bishop Thomas, and according to some previous practices, a new style of rules has been formed as the new Mayor of London. William Cecil knelt down on one knee towards Edward, put his right hand on his chest, closed his eyes slightly, and lowered his head to show his respect for Edward. Mr. William Cecil, in view of your consistent loyalty to the royal family and your outstanding ability, I hereby appoint you as the Mayor of London in the name of the King of England. Edward cleared his throat, made a thick voice, and said to William Cecil at the front and lower, "Thank you for your trust. Your Majesty the King, I will always remain loyal to the royal family, loyal to you and your heirs." Chapter 111. After the ceremony, William Cecil began his inaugural speech under the warm welcome of the crowd. Originally, there was no such link, but in order to ease the tension of the deprived businessmen, Edward specially set up this link, so as to reassure them. Standing next to Edward's luxurious chair, the new Mayor of London, His Excellency William, felt his mouth was thirsty. Subconsciously swallowed. "Mayor William, started his first inaugural speech, and the first inaugural speech in England's history. Your Majesty, ministers and guests sitting here. Mayor William turned his head to look at Edward, bowed, and then bowed to the ministers and guests below. It is a great honor to have the trust of His Majesty the great King Edward, and let me be the Mayor of London. This is a trust, but also a heavy responsibility, so I will earnestly perform my duties as Mayor in the next 4 years, and will never disappoint the expectations of His Majesty the King and the citizens of London. The term of office of the Mayor of London is also stipulated by Edward. He hopes that this position will be held on a regular basis like the current Ming dynasty, changing the past practice of hereditary and long-term appointments. 4 years is neither long nor short. There is no need for elections here. It is enough time for one person to show his skills, and it is even more able to highlight a person's administrative ability. So, with the support and supervision of Parliament, I will start to implement initiatives in London for the benefit of the wider public. Yes, that's right, Edward, the self-governing Parliament in London has not been abolished. This is not only the result of a compromise, but Edward has a deeper meaning in it. In the past, there were only 50 or 60 people in the London Parliament. These people were elites from all walks of life in London. It can be said that they are the public opinion in London as one of the compromise conditions. Edward promised that these people would serve as members of Parliament for life. Without definite evidence, Edward and the Privy Council would not be able to arrest and remove them from their posts, and they happily accepted the decision to abolish London's self-governing rights. Later, Edward stipulated that the City Council has the right to audit the city government's finances, and can impeach city government officials to the king, but officials cannot be removed. Only His Majesty the King can remove them. The City Council has absolutely no power to appoint or remove city officials, nor does it have legislative power, but they can also review the cases judged by the London court, but they can only propose retrial or overturn to the king, and they cannot be overturned directly. Of course, after the City Council retained these rights, Edward also got what he wanted. The number of members of the London City Council was completely nominated by the king, and these people could serve as members only with the consent of the City Council. Moreover, in view of the huge losses caused by the previous pirate attack in London, the London militia will be disbanded, and they will become. Before Mayor William could finish this sentence, there was an uproar in the audience, and immediately a businessman raised his hand to ask a question. Sir, do you have any questions? Mr. Mayor, may I ask why the militia was disbanded? And who will be responsible for the security of London in the future? Seeing this gentleman who interrupted his speech, William smiled, and then said, what this gentleman asked is exactly what I want to say. We will set up a police department. After all the militias are disbanded, they will all become policemen and be responsible for the security of London, and the defense of the City of London will be in charge of His Majesty's Guards, which is the original Guards. Everyone can rest assured about the combat effectiveness of His Majesty's Guards. In fact, the post of police was split by Edward from the sheriff of the local county, which was the predecessor of the British police in the future. This is a position with a long history, and the principle of self-government of the police has been established in Britain since the 9th century. The magistrate sprouted in the period of Richard I, September 8, 1157, April 6, 1199. But Scotland has never been peaceful after Richard ascended the throne. In order to quell the rebellion and curb social unrest, Britain promulgated a decree on maintaining order in the kingdom, reiterating the ancient oath, requiring all men to abide by the king's peace and assist in arresting criminals who violated laws and disrupted order. Local knights were enabled, which became the origin of magistrates after the 12th century. A model gradually emerged in which the justice of the peace led the constable to be responsible for local security, but the magistrate also leads the local militia and is responsible for maintaining local security. He not only has part of the judicial power, but also has military power, which is extremely powerful. At the beginning, after the disbandment of the militia, some people proposed to set up a sheriff, but Edward vetoed it. Therefore, the police appeared in England more than 300 years and advanced the defense of London. Edward was handed over to his own guards. Glancing at the speech in his hand, Mayor William rubbed his eyes and continued, and from the beginning of my tenure, I will follow His Majesty Edward's advice and start to rectify the appearance of London, according to the instructions of His Majesty the King. With the consent of the Privy Council, the London City Management Office will be established. They are fully responsible for the management of all safety and hygiene conditions in London streets, houses, sewers, etc. No one can resist regarding the sanitation situation in London. Edward has been unable to complain, So he can only resort to the urban management army that ranks first in China's combat effectiveness, and the source of these urban management troops is the local disabled militiamen who came back from the expedition to Scotland. Although they are physically disabled, their murderous looks are unstoppable. In addition, the London Autonomous Court is retained. The judges of the court are nominated by the Privy Council, appointed and dismissed by His Majesty the King himself, and supervised by the London City Council. After saying this, everyone in the audience really understood that His Majesty's tentacles had already surrounded London, and the more they struggled, the tighter they gathered. However, Edward has taken back the judicial power, and taxation and finance must be taken back according to the instructions of His Majesty the King and the consent of the Privy Council. Under the City of London government, the Finance Department will be set up independently. The Department of Finance is only responsible to His Majesty the King and me, and no one else can govern. The Treasury Department will be responsible for collecting various taxes from the City of London and its jurisdictions, and 70% of the taxes collected will be turned over to the Privy Council Treasury Department, and the remaining 30% will be obtained by the city government. The establishment of the Ministry of Finance has been welcomed by the ministers of the Privy Council, and no one will have too much money. Next, we will set up the Department of Engineering and Construction, and they will be responsible for. There is also the Office of Inspectorate, who are responsible for monitoring corruption among London officials. We also set up the Port and Dock Management Office, who are responsible for the management of the London port and various docks. We shall set up a workhouse, where all the vagabonds in London will be placed. After talking like this for more than half an hour, the London city government has administered 8 departments. And finally, it is coming to an end. This is the last department. We will set up the Department of Population and Household Registration Management. As soon as the last 2 words came out, the faces of the people below suddenly became more refreshed, and the exhausted breath spreading in the air disappeared without a trace. You must know that although England does not have household registration at this time, local control is very strict due to the development of the enclosure movement. A large number of farmers began to wander to big cities such as London. Since the urban sector could not provide a large number of employment opportunities, poverty and unemployment increased sharply, and social unrest. In order to maintain the economic and social order, the British government implemented both kindness and force. On the one hand, it launched limited relief. On the other hand, it introduced a series of severe punishment and suppression measures. The Parliament enacted the Handicraft Law, which stipulates that people aged 12 to 60 must work, and magistrates can order anyone to do farm work during the busy farming season. Workers' right to move is strictly limited, and no one is allowed to leave without written permission their place of residence, otherwise they will be arrested and deported. The Department of Population and Household Registration will conduct population registration. All people who live in London and own real estate in London, whether they are noble or poor, their names should appear in the files of the London City Government. Thank you everyone. This is the end of my speech. Thank you His Majesty the King and all ministers for their trust. After finishing speaking, William Celsey bowed to Edward and the ministers and councillors under him, and retreated slowly. Immediately, there was a burst of loud applause in the hall. Just when the ministers and congressmen were about to leave, Edward, who had been sitting there, suddenly stood up and returned to William Celsey's position. Seeing His Majesty's actions, everyone present immediately pricked up their ears, showing a listening attitude, and the expressions on their faces became serious. Gentlemen, the establishment of the City of London government is based on the expectations of me and the ministers of the Privy Council. No one should neglect it. After saying this, there was a loud applause from the audience. Edward waited for the round of applause to pass, and then said with a serious face, and in the newly established department this time, all official appointments will be very different from the previous ones, except for the head of the department. We no longer use the recommended method to appoint other officials. Instead of holding an exam that everyone can take, whether you are from London or York, as long as you are from England, you can take this official selection test, no matter which country you originally belong to, even if your family is in France and Spain, as long as your faith belongs to the Anglican sect. Then you can take the London official selection exam. Edward held this official admission examination not only to establish a huge bureaucratic system and promote centralization. More importantly, this wonderful move will promote the promotion of Anglicanism among the people, so that Catholicism will withdraw from England faster. Chapter 112 Trial Implementation of the new official selection system. The selection of officials was determined by examinations. As soon as this proposal appeared, it was opposed by most of the Privy Council ministers, which was completely different from the scenario Edward had envisioned. After all, most of the ministers in the entire Privy Council are of civilian origin, and there are very few noble children. According to the usual logic, they should support this decision unexpectedly. After Edward threw out this proposal, the entire conference room was like a boiling boiler, almost full of opposition of course. They didn't dare to directly oppose the king so blatantly. They turned a corner to persuade Edward to give up this idea. For example, if you say something that does not conform to traditional practices, you should wait a few years before talking about it. It is not easy for the townspeople and gentlemen and nobles to accept. All these persuasions to Edward were farts. Under his arbitrariness, the ministers had no choice but to succumb afterwards. Edward thought for a while, and realized that the ass determines the head. After these ministers who used to be commoners gained power, their thinking was similar to that of the nobles before, and they always wanted their descendants to have a good future. They are not like the nobles. After the nobles become adults, as long as they are approved by the king, they can directly become the local magistrate, or the secretary of the Privy Council, or the general of the army, and they can only rely on their own connections to arrange for their sons or relatives to work as a small secretary in a local or court, or a small errand runner. For this problem, Edward felt that he could not keep pressing, so Edward gave them a priority. What is priority? It means that in the future official selection examination, if there are two people with the same score at the same time, if one of them is the heir or close blood relative of the minister of the Privy Council, then that person will be given priority for admission if this privilege is good. In fact, if the person is not capable, he will not be on the admission list. If the ability is strong, this privilege is useless, but if your test scores are relatively poor, half a barrel of water, then priority admission is very important. At the same time, in order to prevent this right from being abused, Edward stipulated that each minister can only use it 3 times, and if it is used up, there will be no more. Therefore, the plan to select officials through examinations was passed. After Edward finished speaking, the audience burst into applause like thunder. The level of applause this time was unusual, more passionate than the previous rounds of applause, and lasted longer, lasting about half a minute. Seeing that this examination system is so in line with people's hearts, Edward also has more confidence in implementing this system throughout the country. I have decided to hold the official admission examination in London 3 months later, that is, on April 28th. In this selection test, everyone can only rely on their grades to obtain official positions, not on their bloodlines. Why should it be set in 3 months? In this age when information is not circulating, coupled with the rudimentary means of transportation, it is already difficult to get to London from other places in 3 months. In this way, the warm atmosphere at the scene continued until after Edward stepped down. Fisher is a businessman and a member of London City Council. For a small businessman relying on his own sewing skills, he gradually became a big businessman with more than a dozen clothing stores. For a person of civilian origin, he was able to become a London city councillor and entered the circle of high-ranking figures in London. But for him at present, he is quite satisfied with his current position, but like all parents in the world, he has higher requirements for his children than himself. In England, where the status of merchants is relatively low, the guarantee of wealth for merchants is very low, and only the nobles are the rulers of England. And if you want to become a nobleman, you must win the favor of the king. But how can you let the king see you? Only when commoners become officials can they see the face of the king and have the possibility of becoming nobles. Under normal circumstances, most of the official positions are monopolized by nobles, and it is much more difficult for ordinary people to sit in high positions. What's more, the status of an official is not only much higher than that of a businessman, but also a small fortune in ordinary times is equivalent to the annual income of an ordinary businessman, and businessmen still have moments of loss, while officials are absolutely guaranteed income from droughts and floods. With a joyful mood, Fisher sat in the carriage and urged the coachman to rush home. As one of the few clothing merchants in London, his house is located in the middle of the wealthy district, where the land is very expensive. Getting out of the car in a hurry, Fisher quickly ran out of the car, walked to the second floor with some staggering steps, and knocked on the door of a room. Dong dong dong. A series of hasty knocks on the door awakened the sleeping young man. The young man's face was slashed, with 2 short eyebrows above dark blue eyes, a straight nose, thin lips, and a sparse beard on his chin. Looks like a formidable character. If the long golden hair is removed, in fact, Vesely is a genius-like figure. Since he was a child, he has read all the books in his family. Relying on the business atmosphere at home, he has already perfected his research on the subject of mathematics. When he was 12 years old, he curiously looked through the account books at home, and with an interesting mind, he carefully recalculated the account books. In this way, he recovered a loss of £300 for his father, that is, Fisher, and also helped him find 2 guys who were struggling. Since then, His family has never hired an accountant, and he has been in control of his family's account books afterwards. He turned over the Bible and taught himself Latin. By the way, when he was 16 years old, he went to France and started to play. In half a year, he not only opened a tailor shop to Paris, but also learned French. Then he went to study at the University of Paris, which was established in 1180 and is known as the oldest university in the world, along with the University of Bologna in Italy, and is also known as the mother of European universities. 3 years later, he returned to London and stopped paying attention to his family's business, hiding in his room and studying the books he brought back from the University of Paris for his son. Fisher has high expectations, but he has been less interested in other things. Who is it? Vesely rubbed his tired eyes and asked in a troubled tone. Vesely, get up. There is something here that you are definitely interested in. Knowing that his precious son had stayed up all night studying books again, Fisher said in a joyful tone, "No. My God, Dad, you have said this countless times, don't disturb my sleep, okay?" Vesely didn't even open his eyes, and covered his head with a velvet quilt again, and said helplessly, "Okay. But this time I really didn't lie to you. You will definitely be interested in this matter." Fisher was also a little embarrassed about his previous bad deeds, but he still spoke loudly again. "Vesely, His Majesty the King is planning to hold an examination to recruit officials in 3 months' time." "Really? Then what does this have to do with me? I don't want to be an official." Stuffed in the comfortable quilt, Vesely said willfully, "Think about it. There must be a lot of people taking the exam this time. If you take the exam, you might be in the top of the exam, and your name will spread all over England. Besides, England is so big, there must be a few like-minded people with you. Don't you hate that no one will accompany you to study those books together? This time is a good opportunity." Fisher outside the door tried to persuade him that he was very sure that he could persuade his son this time. In fact, he guessed right. Vesely, who has always been going smoothly, usually has a modest smile on his face, but he is always proud in his heart, and he looks down on other stupid ordinary people. He couldn't find anyone with the same talent as himself. He has been seeking defeat alone, and no one understands the loneliness in his heart. After listening to his father's words, Vesely suddenly opened his closed eyes, lifted the quilt, and opened the door in his pajamas. "Dad, is what you said true?" Vesely put his hands on Fisher's shoulders, shaking them non-stop. "Yes, yes, yes, these are all true. You can take the selection test. Stop first, I'm a little dizzy." Fisher felt a little uncomfortable being shaken, and felt like he was about to throw up, so he stopped Vesely. "Okay Dad, what do I need to prepare?" "Son, I don't need to prepare anything. At my level, this kind of exam is not difficult for me." Vesely didn't care about Fisher anymore, and started talking to himself from the side, which made Fisher a little embarrassed. Putting down his raised right hand, Fisher didn't blame him at all. He was used to his son's state after attending the inauguration ceremony. Edward didn't care about the chattering crowd below, nor did he attend the gathering started by the nobles, ministers, and parliamentarians. He just sat in the carriage and returned to his own palace. As soon as Edward came back, he saw Baron Smith and Sir John, who had been away for nearly 2 months. The two of them looked as if they had washed, but the tiredness on their faces couldn't stop them. "Your Majesty, the two of us successfully recruited 500 gallant cavalry, 500 longbowmen, and 1,000 strong infantry from Lancaster and Cornwall." Baron Smith, as the current commander of the Royal Guards, took the lead in reporting to Edward. "Yes, Your Majesty. Relying on your blessing, the people of England came to sign up one after another after hearing your instructions." The scene was really shocking. "Soon, we recruited so many people, and according to your instructions, among the 2,000 people recruited, half of them are freemen, about 1,000 people, but they are basically infantry and longbowmen." The Minister of Royal Affairs, Sir John, also hastily added. Chapter 113, The Princess and Number 039, Marriage. Hearing the two people's answers, Edward nodded in satisfaction, with a smile on his face. Seeing His Majesty's satisfied expression, Baron Smith and Sir John breathed a sigh of relief, looked at each other, and nodded. Edward didn't see the small movements of the two people in front of him, but turned his head and cast his eyes out of the window. At this time, London was still as lively as usual, but Whitehall Palace was located in the center of London. There were no shops and merchants, only people coming and going. There are well-dressed and personable gentlemen on the carriage, ladies chatting and laughing, slow-paced businessmen wearing tall hats, and ordinary citizens in a hurry. This is London, at the end of the Middle Ages. London, where capitalism was sprouting very well. "Lord Smith, you put these good boys in the barracks outside London, where the militia used to be. You train them well for me. just like training orphans a while ago?" Edward didn't look back, just looked at the green glass window, and said slowly, "Yes, Your Majesty." Baron Smith saluted Edward sternly. "Sir John, hurry up and get the money in place, and you will pay these people's salaries in the future." "Yes, Your Majesty." "Well, what is the monthly salary of these people?" Sir John answered hastily, but when he rolled his eyes, the miserliness reappeared. "Well, let's count it as 12 shillings per month now. After half a year, it will rise to £1, and after another year, it will be enough to raise it to the level of the 8th floor of these old guards." These words touched Edward's heart, even though he was not sensitive to money, but with 3,000 people added up, the monthly salary alone was terrifying, and it would make Edward's heart ache even more. Moreover, it would be unfair to the veterans who supported it if the newcomers were on the same level as the veterans who had followed Henry VIII. "Yes, Your Majesty, your instructions are the beacon of my actions," said Sir John grumpily. At this moment, the little maid Lucy came over and whispered into Edward's ear, "Let him come in too. Just talking together." "Yes, Your Majesty." Lucy bowed politely, then stepped back. Soon, the middle-aged handsome Alexander Cavalier, dressed in bright clothes and elegant, walked in. His every move was pleasing to the eye, and he naturally developed a good impression of him. After all, handsome men and beautiful women are all privileged, and automatic liking is one of them. "Good day, Your Majesty." "Good day, Mr. Knight." "Mr. Knight, what do you need today?" Edward finally turned around and asked suspiciously, "Your Majesty, you ordered 50 orphans to be selected as guards, and the selection has already been completed." Alexander Knight's voice is very mellow, with the magnetism of a middle-aged man and the softness of a woman. "It sounds very intoxicating. Among them, there are 30 males and 20 females, all selected from the best." "Very good. Let those who are not selected by the oldest group of orphans join the Dark Blade." Edward was very happy that the orphans with high loyalty joined the guards, and his control over the guards was even deeper. If any of those orphans who are screened out want to continue studying, and if they are more talented in reading, let them go to university. I don't think any university would dare not accept them. Edward thought carefully again. He couldn't kill some children who might be future scientists or inventors, and these people's contributions to society are still quite large. "Yes, Your Majesty." Alexander was a little puzzled as to why Edward wanted these people to go to college. What was the use of studying, and he still had to pay tuition? "Oh, by the way, Mr. Knight, if there are orphans with outstanding reading talents in the future, let them continue to study. And, dear Sir John, you are responsible for the college expenses of these orphans." Hearing what Edward said, Sir John immediately had a bitter face, with reluctance on his face. "Yes, Your Majesty." "As you bid," replied Sir John reluctantly. "That's it for today. You can retire." Edward waved at the three of them and said lazily, "Yes, we are leaving, Your Majesty." The three bowed and said in unison. The three of them backed away slowly, and when they reached the door, they turned around and walked away. Edward stayed alone for a while, then walked out of the room and came to the backyard. Ha ha ha. Before the Edwards arrived, they heard a series of laughter like wind chimes, which made Edward smile knowingly. Sure enough, as soon as Edward arrived, he saw his elder sister Elizabeth and little Lolita Marie sitting on the hanging chair together, pushed by Casey and her maid, and quickly flew to gouge. The little Lolly sitting on the hanging chair squinted her eyes happily, and a series of moving laughter emerged from her small mouth, and Elizabeth, who was wearing a long white dress, was like a child, yelling happily, without the slightest look of a princess. Edward just stood there, watching with amusement. After about 10 minutes, little Lolly and Elizabeth, who had been playing for a while, stopped, sweating profusely, as if they had fought a battle, and were extremely tired. After the two came down, they found Edward's existence. Little Lolita ran over quickly and threw herself into Edward's arms. "Brother Edward, why didn't you tell me when you came here?" Edward lifted little Lolita high, making her squint her eyes and open her mouth wide open. After stopping, little Lolly frowned suddenly, put her hands on her hips, stared at Edward with her round eyes and said, "Oh, that's who has been playing with a hanging chair all the time, and he didn't bring me to play with him." Edward squatted down, looked at the little Lolita and said jokingly, "Haha." The little Lolly with her tense face couldn't hold back anymore, and laughed happily. "Brother Edward, don't blame me for not coming back." Little Lolita showed an embarrassed smile, and then said righteously, putting all the responsibility on Edward, "Okay, I'll spare you this time. You must add me next time." "Lagow, okay, pull the hook. Don't change for 100 years." Little Lolita stretched out her little finger, hooked up with Edward's little finger, and said loudly. After Edward and little Lolita had a fight for a while, He walked towards Elizabeth, whose face was covered with the black lines. "Hey, Elizabeth, I didn't expect you to like playing this. Hey, can't I play this? Little Edward, do you want to discipline me like your father?" In order to cover up her embarrassment, Elizabeth showed a ferocious expression on her face, and said fiercely, and while speaking, she even gestured with her fist, "No, no, how dare I care about Her Royal Highness Princess Elizabeth? I just want to say, if you knew you liked to play, I would have done it for you a long time ago." Edward waved his hands again and again, making fearful movements, and then said puff. Seeing Edward making such a move, Elizabeth and little Lolita laughed together. Seeing the two laughing together, Edward rolled his eyes indifferently, and let them laugh. "Well, Elizabeth, are you 16 this year?" Edward looked at Princess Elizabeth with fair skin and fluttering hair, and asked aloud. "Yes, you are right. What's the matter?" Elizabeth was asked this age question suddenly, feeling a little weird, and then asked back, "That's why you're not too young anymore. A lady from a noble family is already engaged, or married, and has a child. Now the ruling and opposition parties are talking about your marriage, and I also think you have reached the age to get married. It's time to get married. Of course, I will completely give you the right to decide on your marriage. Even if you like a small noble, or even a businessman or a commoner, I will not stop you." After Edward finished speaking, he directly made Elizabeth blush, and Her Royal Highness, who is usually carefree, was also a little embarrassed. "Well, Edward, don't worry about me. I will find it myself." Speaking of this, Elizabeth's face finally turned into a big apple. "By the way, Edward, my marriage is not important, but Sister Mary's is very important. She is very old." At this time, Elizabeth found a good excuse to change the subject, which was Princess Mary's marriage. Princess Mary, who was born in 1516, is already 33 years old. Even in China in the 21st century, such older leftover women are rare. Of course, she is not to blame for such a situation. The main responsibility lies with Henry VIII and fate. In 1518, when Mary was 2 years old, Henry VIII betrothed her to the Dauphin of France, the son of King François I of France. But 3 years later, the engagement was annulled. In 1522, she was arranged to enter into a marriage contract with her 22-year-old cousin, Charles V of the Holy Roman Empire. But a few years later, Charles V married a Portuguese princess, and Mary's marriage fell through. Francis I of France was once again seen as Mary's betrothal, as their marriage would lead to friendship between the two countries. A later marriage contract also guaranteed that Mary would marry Francis I or his second son, Henry, Duke of Orleans. However, Wolsey, Henry VII's chief advisor, succeeded in preserving the alliance between the two countries through other methods, and Mary's political marriage also lost its purpose. The marriage fell through again. So, after Elizabeth's reminder, Edward finally noticed that his eldest sister, Princess Mary, had never been married. "Well, indeed, it's time for Mary to find a husband." Edward thought for a while, then said, "However, don't try to avoid it, you can get married too." Chapter 114 The Birth of Henry VIII. Elizabeth wisely chose to delay Edward's question. "Edward, what kind of marriage?" "I don't want to get married so early." Elizabeth hugged Edward's arm, and Edward's slender arm was squeezed endlessly. It was soft and firm in all directions, and Edward's heart trembled. Okay, I'll give you another year, the whole of London, the whole of England. I don't believe there is nothing you like." Although Edward enjoyed it in his heart, he still had to worry about ethics, so he hastily withdrew his arm. "Okay, that's what you said. I'll go first, and go on a horse." As soon as Edward's voice changed, Elizabeth immediately ignored Edward and walked away. "His Royal Highness, where are you going? Have you finished today's court etiquette class?" Just as Elizabeth was about to go out, a hoarse voice stopped Elizabeth from walking. Elizabeth turned around slowly and stiffly, showing a dumbfounding smile, and nodded gently to the owner of the voice. A slightly stooped middle-aged woman came out of the darkness. Like an Englishman, she had a head of graying blonde hair. Her body is like that of a Western woman, and she starts to gain weight in middle age, but relying on her tall height, her whole body looks only slightly plump, and she doesn't look disgusting. However, she has a pair of sharp eyes, a high bridge of nose, and wrinkled corners of her eyes, making her an easygoing character. However, as the maid of Edward's mother Jane Seymour, relying on Henry VII's memory of Jane Seymour, her status in the royal family has always been very high, and she had been Elizabeth's chaperone, planning her whole life that, "Mammy, I'm going to class. Look, I forgot," Elizabeth said cleverly with a flattering expression. "Okay, Aunt Anna, thank you for your reminder. I'm about to go. Edward, I'm going to class. Goodbye." Witnessed by Edward, Elizabeth performed Sichuan face-changing performances at this level. If I can't win the actress in modern times, I will lose seeing Elizabeth's vigorous body out of sight. Aunt Anna looked at Edward again. Your Majesty, please forgive me, I haven't seen you for a while. Sister Anna saluted Edward lightly, and said in a neutral tone, it doesn't matter, Aunt Anna, Elizabeth's class is more important. Go and supervise her. Leave us alone. Edward waved his hands, said indifferently, and hugged the little lolly who looked a little scared with both hands. Not only that, Edward also betrayed Elizabeth severely, and at this moment, her distressed look emerged in her heart. Okay, Your Majesty. Then I will take my leave. Sister Anna with a cold face finally left. At this time, the little lolly who was holding Edward's waist tightly let go of her hand. Slowly the wrinkled little face also slowly unfolded, but there was still a hint of fear in the eyes. Brother Edward, Aunt Anna is so scary. Little lolly raised her neck and said softly to Edward, yes. Sister Anna looks terrible, but little Mary, don't be afraid. In fact, Aunt Anna just looks scary. She is actually very good, and she likes children like little Mary the most. Edward comforted little Lori softly, but kept stroking her long red hair with both hands. Really? Then I won't be afraid, and I will definitely not be afraid next time. Little Lolly puffed out her chest and said confidently, N. Mary is the best, no one will be afraid. Edward did not pierce little Lolita's rhetoric, but said encouragingly just as Edward and the other two were about to start the hanging chair again, Lucy, who was in the distance, came over at this time. Your Majesty, Mr. Udall said that the script you ordered has been written. Do you want to check it out? Lucy glanced at little Lolita, then said to Edward in a crisp voice, oh? Really? This is really good. After Edward heard the news, a relieved smile appeared on his face. Well, very well. What a delight. Come on, Mary, was your castle built last time? No. Brother Edward didn't come to help. Aunt Casey is so stupid. Sister Lucy not only can't get along, but also often makes trouble. After saying this, Casey on the side showed an embarrassed expression and turned his head to the other side as she said that. Little Lolita also made a grimace at Lucy, who was so angry that Lucy stomped on the opposite side. Okay, then go build the castle. This time I'll put Lucy in prison, so I won't let her disturb you. Go. I'll go and see Mary's results later. Edward looked at the little Lolita's pink and jade-carved face, and said softly, okay, Brother Edward, I promise to surprise you. Little Lolly clenched her fists and assured her in a sweet voice, and slowly walked back to her room under Casey's hand. Okay, Lucy, I'm here to coax the children, let's go. Edward glanced at Lucy, who was still puffing out her pink cheeks, and said helplessly, HMPH. Mary will sue. In fact, she made a mistake in the construction, and no one will help her. With Lucy rambling on like this, Edward finished the distance of nearly 500 meters when I came to Udall's room. The door was open at this time, and I could see busy figures from the outside. He went straight in, came to his side, and watched him write silently. The desk was full of curled up waste paper, but fortunately Edward had brought paper making ahead of time, and it was made of birch bark that was ubiquitous in England. However, Edward did not popularize it. He considered that a lot of knowledge in books were not recorded on paper. To be precise, they were not recorded. According to Edward's meaning, Edward recruited a literacy army of hundreds of people, and began to create the history of England with the intention of His Majesty King Edward. Edward has only one requirement for them: the divine right of kings, and around this theme, the history of England is described. We must also firmly grasp the legitimacy of the French kings of the Tudor royal family and the illegality of the current French royal family. As for the format, Edward directly referred to Taishigang's historical records. Each king gave him a biography, and famous noble families in history, as well as nobles or courtiers who were loyal to the king, also listed a biography according to the textual research and records in the royal collection. The project went very smoothly, and 1/5 of it had been completed in more than a year. Edward is very satisfied with this. He is not afraid of your slowness, but he is afraid of your rough workmanship, full of loopholes, and not convincing. Only history books that can stand the research and scrutiny of others are the history books that can be handed down in the true sense. Gossip away. Let's go back to the original point. The dramatist Udall, who has dressed up in a new way, has turned into a middle-aged uncle with slovenly appearance. Fortunately, because the maids come to clean it every day, the whole room looks tidy. After staying for a long time, Udall, who had been working hard, finally developed Edward. His eyes were full of surprise. Your Majesty, when did you come? I'm really sorry, nothing. I heard that your Henry VIII has been written. Come and show me. Edward stopped Udall from apologizing and asked him directly. Yes, I'll look for it. Udall looked at the messy desktop and said apologetically, it's okay, You look for it slowly. I'm not in a hurry. Edward found a chair, sat on it, and said calmly. Udall quickly got into the pile of waste paper, pouted his buttocks, and slowly searched for it. After a while, Udall lay on the ground with his butt pouted, laughing with a smile. Your Majesty, I found it. Before Edward could make a move, Lucy walked over and took it from Udall's hand. This is about the thickness of more than 20 sheets of paper, and Edward looked through it with great interest. 10 minutes later, after reading the script, Edward nodded with satisfaction, basically meeting Edward's request. Mr. Udall, your writing is very good, and I am very satisfied. Lucy, go and get £50 for Mr. Udall's hard work. Hearing that Edward rewarded himself in this way, Udall's face seemed to be congested with blood, and he was very excited. Thank you so much, Your Majesty, really. Udall bowed his head gratefully and said, nothing, sir, you deserve it. Edward said some pretentious words in a timely manner. However, your description of His Majesty Charles VIII, King of France at that time, is still not deep enough. This, Your Majesty, I don't know how you think it should be corrected. Udall was really puzzled by Edward's words, so he could only lower his head, shy face, and asked in a low voice, without a trace of arrogance of a writer, well, why did you say that Charles VIII would sponsor my grandfather to return to England? And he was willing to send him back? Is this a normal behavior? This is not in line with common sense. Edward told a story that does not conform to common sense. It does not conform to the common sense story that Edward thinks in his heart. He also knew that Charles VIII was purely trying to make England mess up, just to reap the benefits of the fishermen. But in this way, wouldn't Henry VIII be suspected of betraying the country? I think my grandfather should be. Under Edward's editing, Henry VIII outwits Charles VIII, bravely overcomes difficulties, wins the victory, and proudly returns to England from France. Of course, Charles VIII, who lost the bet, also paid some price, such as money. Only in this way will it be more dramatic, and will anyone like to watch it? Chapter 115. The London Iron Yard Merchant. Okay, go and change it. 3 days later, I need to see this script in my study. Yes, Your Majesty, I promise to give you a perfect answer. Udall was very attentive to Edward's instructions, so he couldn't help but patted his chest and agreed with a confident look on his face. Very good. Mr. Udall, your attitude is very satisfying. I look forward to your performance. With that said, Edward went back to his room, leaving behind Udall writing. The next morning, Edward enjoyed oatmeal while listening to his young servant Andre's report. Your Majesty, the Rose Theatre, the Swan Theatre and other 4 theatres, I have followed your instructions and have completely purchased them. They are completely the property of the royal family. Andre turned a blind eye to the delicious food in front of him, and reported solemnly, really? Isn't there any twists and turns? Edward's attention was focused on the dishes on the table at this time. Picking up a piece of vegetable stir-fried by an English chef, he looked at the blackened color, chewed it in his mouth helplessly, and swallowed it. Yes, although there are still some twists and turns, relying on His Majesty's majesty, I have successfully acquired 4 theatres. Andre felt a little embarrassed, but he still reported to Edward seriously. Edward didn't care about Andre's emotions. He was still eating under his own guidance. The craftsmanship of the royal chef. They were just a few minor nobles, and they were not worthy of letting Edward know their names. This acquisition of 4 theatres cost a total of £220, including the real estate of the theatres, and the signing of more than 60 actors and screenwriters. Your Majesty, this is the result of my 1 month's work. After Andre finished speaking, he stood aside with a low eyebrow and a pleasing look. After Edward finished eating a bowl of oatmeal, he wiped his mouth with a towel, and then looked up at his young servant. Andre, you did a good job. After all, it's the first time you've done this kind of thing, so it's understandable. Edward said non-committally. Okay, since you have completed the task well, then, let you be in charge of running the 4 theatres. This is another test for you. By the way, since this is the case, you will have a salary, so £2 a month. Thank you, Your Majesty the Great King. I will definitely not disappoint your expectations, and I will definitely increase their profitability. Hearing that Edward handed over the business of running the theatre to himself, Andre couldn't help but be overjoyed, and promised again and again, especially the first time he had his salary, and it was a huge sum of £2, which made his excited heart even more excited. Okay, you go down first. Remember, profit is not the main thing. At present, you just need to cooperate with Udall to put the play Henry VIII on the stage. Yes, Your Majesty. Andre retired slowly, but his ambition was more than that. How would he reflect his level if he didn't make a profit? After watching Andre leave, Edward looked at Lucy beside him, and asked helplessly, Lucy, who else is there? Your Majesty, Mr. Parker Matthew, the acting Speaker of the London City Council, has something to see. Lucy stood aside, bent slightly and said, Edward could see the two jade plates of some size from the corner of his eye. Does he have anything to say? Edward asked calmly, pretending not to see it. It seems to be about the Hanseatic League, but I don't know the details. A confused look appeared on Lucy's face, and then she said to Edward, well, then you can invite him in. Edward acted like I knew it, which made Lucy a little silly. The Hanseatic League was a commercial and political alliance formed between cities in northern Germany. The word Hanse means public office or guild hall in German. This business alliance was gradually formed in the 13th century, and reached its prosperity in the 14th century, with a maximum of 160 participating cities, and in 1367, a leadership organization headed by the city of Lübeck was established, and rich merchants and nobles from big cities such as Hamburg, Cologne, and Bremen participated. Not only did it have its own armed forces and treasury, but it also defeated Denmark in 1370 and signed the Treaty of Stralsund, which directly led to the decline of Denmark's maritime hegemony. Moreover, the Hanseatic League monopolizes trade in the Baltic Sea region, and has established commercial stations in the coastal areas from London in the west and Novgorod in the east. With strong strength it declined in the 15th century and disintegrated in 1669, therefore, Edward has to pay attention to the matters related to this huge organization soon. The servants cleaned up the dining table in front of Edward, and he straightened his clothes to maintain his demeanor. Led by Lucy, an old gentleman dressed as a gentleman with a Mediterranean hairstyle, grey beard and hair, and black-rimmed eyes walked in with a cane. Good day, Your Majesty. Good day, Speaker Matthew. After Edward stood up to show respect, the two sat on chairs and began to communicate face to face. My Mr. Speaker, I don't know what brought you here, Your Majesty. I am here this time not to represent myself, but to represent the majority of London's citizens and businessmen to sue you against the Hanseatic League. Mr. Speaker coughed, then put his hands on the crutches, and said righteously, oh? Really? Edward pretended to be surprised. Then what is it about the Hanseatic League that makes all London so indignant? Regarding Edward's question, Mr. Speaker was already prepared, took a sip of tea, moistened his throat, and then spoke in an orderly manner. Your Majesty, the whole matter still begins with His Majesty Henry II. After a group of businessmen from Cologne had a long-term commercial relationship with England, they finally accepted the invitation of the King of England in 1250 and set up a foreign commercial agency in London, named the Steel Yard. The Steel Yard Henry II specially set up an agency for these Orientals, giving them special treatment, and exempting them from all other restrictions and import duties that foreign businessmen are subject to. The Hanseatic merchants in Britain were full of passionate and long-lasting conflicts and struggles from top to bottom. At that time, the British were completely inexperienced in commerce, so from Edward II onwards, Hanseatic merchants under the title of Merchants of the Steel Yard, monopolized all foreign trade of the kingdom. They conducted their commerce entirely with their own merchant ships, so that British shipping was at that time in a state of extreme decline. The relationship between England and the Hanseatic League was similar to that between Poland and Holland and between Germany and England. The British exports were wool, tin, leather, and cream when Britain was still in a rather backward state, because it did not have any means and awareness of trade. It was satisfied with giving itself hunting grounds, pastures, forests and agricultural products, in short, all kinds of raw materials, to find a way out, and glad to be able to exchange for better clothes, implements and utensils, and precious metals, thinking that this trade brought them considerable benefits. But when the exchanges deepened and the British understood the transaction flow of the Hanseatic merchants, a natural change of thinking appeared. Why can't we do the same thing ourselves? Therefore, businessmen in England are currently dissatisfied with their position in the low-end industrial chain. Moreover, since the merchants of the Hanseatic League have tax-free rights in London, the cost of goods for the English merchants is completely higher than that of the Hanseatic merchants, so basically, they were defeated by the Hanseatic merchants. Regarding the current situation, the merchants had no choice but to see Edward's drastic reforms, so they pinned their hopes on Edward. In fact, in the early 16th century, the Hanseatic League began to decline. In the period of Henry VIII, Britain began to prohibit the direct export of precious metals, and required Hanseatic League merchants to use the profits to buy local products in England. By Edward's time, the Hanseatic League had suffered major blows everywhere in the eastern Baltic Sea. The Teutonic Knights, the traditional allies of the Hanseatic League, began to decline in the 15th and 16th centuries. The Russian Empire and the Kingdom of Poland took this opportunity to take measures that harmed the interests of the Hanseatic League. In 1478, Tsar Ivan III occupied Novgorod and expelled all Hanseatic merchants in Flanders, the powerful Burgundy Duchy in the 15th century and the Federal Republic that emerged in the 16th century threatened the Hanseatic League by building the port of Antwerp and encouraging pirate attacks. For now, Edward can't bear the existence of a duty-free zone on his own territory. However, things cannot be done all at once, Your Majesty. A group of Hanse merchants acted recklessly in London. For example, when Earl Edward Seymour went to Scotland last year, these Hanse merchants wanted to drive up prices. The citizens of London are not only suffering from it, but the price of supplies shipped to the front has also increased by 3 levels. The rapid drying up of the national treasury is not unrelated to their price manipulation behavior. In the end, Mr. Speaker concluded that this was a burst of bitter tears, which made Mr. Speaker himself very sad, and his eyes were moist. The old chairman Matthew just looked at Edward expectantly, as if saying his savior, "Okay, Mr. Speaker, I already know the specific situation, and the specific meaning of the treatment will be released in a few days." Edward couldn't bear this kind of look, and then said in a somewhat embarrassed manner, "Your Majesty, in order to congratulate you on your recovery, our merchants in London specially gave you a small gift. Please accept it." If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 116. This is a welcome gift of £5,000 from us. I hope you can accept it. Edward looked at a small bank in front of him receiving checks, and felt unreal in his heart at this moment. He felt that he had underestimated these merchants. It is really a big deal for a small meeting gift to bribe him with £5,000. You know, a knight's annual surplus is only about £100, and the standard for a middle-class family in London is £50 of property, and £5,000 is enough for the entire London citizen to buy food for a week. Edward had no doubts about the authenticity of the check in front of him. After all, no one would dare to deceive the king. Edward gave a non-committal grace, and silently watched the speaker's next move. These are just deposits, and the remaining £5,000 will be sent in the next period of time. Edward understood what he meant. This was to see if he had implemented any measures. The £5,000 was hanging in front of him. After all, in this age, the king sometimes had bad credit. Very good. As the King of England, it is my bounden duty to protect the interests of the English people, Edward said without paying attention to the exaggerated expression of the old man opposite him. I think, in a few days, you will see the disappearance of London's iron yard and the news will spread throughout London. Bless you, great king. I think you are the greatest king in the history of England. No, you are the greatest king in the history of Europa. Hearing Edward's assurance, even though Mr. Speaker had a low chance of believing it in his heart, he still pretended to be reverent and said exaggeratedly, "Immediately." The two had a pleasant conversation about the establishment of the London city government. After Edward refilled 2 cups of tea, Speaker Matthew finally left Whitehall Palace. Edward stared at the thing that looked like a bank check in front of him, silently in a daze. In general, historians believe that the earliest bank in the world was the Italian bank established in Venice in 1407. Afterwards, the Dutch successively established banks in Amsterdam, Germany in Hamburg, and the United Kingdom in London. It was not until the end of the 18th century to the beginning of the 19th century that banks developed. Generally in the 16th and 17th centuries, when capitalism flourished, some civilians got rich through business and became wealthy businessmen as nouveau riche. They do not have the castles and mansions that the nobles have tightly guarded, and they all store their money in the king's treasury for the safety of their property. At that time, there was no safest place than the king's place, and London was controlled by a group of businessmen who were not afraid of the king's private possession. It should be noted here that there was no paper pound at that time, and the so-called saving money refers to storing gold because what Europe practiced at that time was free casting coin, free coinage system. Anyone can take gold nuggets to the mint and mint them into gold coins, so the mint allows customers to deposit gold. Of course, only the King of England has the right to mint coins, and the so-called mint belongs to Edward's family. Therefore, the thing that appeared in front of Edward's eyes, which looked like a bank check for later generations, was actually a certificate for receiving gold from the mint to which Edward's royal family belonged. And what do banks mainly do to make money at this time? The answer is loans and currency exchange. These two are the main profit points. Of course, it was a feudal bank at this time, and it only had the general function of a money bank in Chinese history, and the capitalist bank has to go to the Bank of England established in England in 1694, which is the world's first capitalist joint stock bank. A capitalist bank is a special capitalist enterprise whose main function is to operate monetary capital, issue credit circulation instruments, and act as a credit intermediary and payment intermediary among capitalists. The business hall of the Hanseatic merchants in London is called Steelyard. The Chamber of Commerce is located in the west of the City of London, occupying nearly 100 acres of land in a bustling civilian area compared with a lively business atmosphere. The Hanseatic merchants set up tall and large walls around their guild halls to prevent the intrusion of loud noises. It also established a sense of mystery among the common people, which made businessmen proud to be able to enter the London Steelyard in this self-contained environment. There are their own warehouses, measuring stations, offices and residences, which seems to be a special zone. I guess this is the origin of the concession in the future, because in the steel courtyard, not only can tax exemption be made, but also the judiciary is independent. And it has its own management agency, which is simply a replica of the concession. The shop was chartered by King Henry VIII in 1282, allowing Hanseatic merchants to mine tin mines in England, and goods were allowed to pass duty-free as a member of the Lloyds family. Mark Lloyds is very proud, because he is now in his 20s and has already started to take charge of the family's business in London. As a member of the Lloyds family, Mark was favored by his father because of his business talent, and was sent to an important place in the family, England, to be responsible for purchasing sea salt produced in England. As a member of the Hanseatic League, the Lloyds family almost monopolized the Baltic Sea's broken promise supply, and the annual profits went to the sea. And England is the main supplier of family salt. Walking into this guild hall known as the Iron and Steel Yard, Mark saw a large cart and goods. A dozen young and strong guys in short jackets and short sleeves were constantly carrying them, unloading them and moving them to the warehouse. Even though it was already spring, their clothes were soaked with sweat, and their originally white faces now turned sallow. Mark knew that this was the sea salt purchased from all over England since the spring, hoarded and prepared to be transported to the Baltic Sea coast when the fleet arrives next month. Walking on a flat path, Mark is no stranger to such scenes. He knew that after staying for a month, there would be more such busy people. Holding his black towel hat in his hand, Mark picked up a handkerchief from time to time to wipe the sweat from his forehead. As a person born in the German region, he really couldn't adapt to the weather in London. It was still rainy in the morning, but the sun came out at noon. More importantly, at that time, he was discussing business matters with a businessman in Yorkshire at the wine table, which made him sweat all over. However, wearing hats has always been popular in England, whether it is a tall hat or what kind of hat. But when you go out, you must have a hat, otherwise you will be laughed at. Therefore, for the sake of business, he endured the scorching heat, and Mark never took off his hat, so now he is like this group of lowly workers, sweating through his underwear. He didn't care about anything else. He walked straight towards the residential area. He had no other thoughts, he just wanted to have a good change of clothes along the way. He forced a smile on his face and greeted other Hansa traders. Vichy, hurry up and prepare hot water, I want to take a shower. Opening this luxurious living room that belonged to him, Mark hung his hat on the back of the chair and ordered to the cleaning maid. As a businessman, he didn't have the same unbearable tolerance for taking a bath as the conservative nobles and clerics. After all, in Germany, taking a bath in the bathroom is already a part of daily life, so that people living in the city still need to pay a certain fee, the bath fee, which is included in the salary of the Handicraft Guild, and a fee levied on the bathhouse tax. Dollars are redistributed to the poor, who bathe for free. Yes, sir. The maid Vichy was brought by Mark from Stedin's hometown, so it is very convenient to use the guarantee of loyalty as the first priority, and the second is to meet his normal physical needs. Vichy diligently arranged the bathtub, towels, and a change of clothes, and finally brought buckets of hot water from the back kitchen. Seeing the steaming hot tub, Mark took off his clothes directly under the service of Vichy, and lay comfortably in the tub, not wanting to move. The maid Vichy also took off her coat without hesitation, revealing her bumpy figure wrapped in a thin shirt, her long brown hair hanging on her delicate pink shoulders, coupled with her big charming eyes. The whole person looks very tempting, but Mark, who was tired all day, expressed that he was not blessed to endure it. He closed his eyes and let the hot water surround him. This feeling was extremely comfortable. Vichy on the side knelt on his knees, and beat Mark's shoulders and arms lightly and rhythmically with his rough little hands. Sir, those London businessmen have not given up yet. They sent people to Whitehall Palace today. I'm afraid they want to deal with us again. With his eyes closed, Mark heard his maid whispering in his ear. Bursts of aroma came into his nose, and Mark couldn't help twitching his nose and sniffing. Yes. Today I went to buy sea salt from a Yorkshire salt merchant. It took me a lot of effort to negotiate a successful deal. In the end, I still added 3 pence per pound to the purchase price. I'm afraid they also got some news, and they want to raise the price one by one. For Vichy, Mark usually would not treat her as an ordinary maid, and would discuss with her when encountering business matters, and Vichy did not disappoint Mark's trust, not only took good care of him in life, but also helped Mark well in business. What can I do? Even if my older brothers are here together, they can't change the little King of England's mind. Mark opened his eyes and sighed helplessly. There are 4 brothers in the Lloyd's family, each in charge of a business, and he is in charge of England, the family's main source of sea salt. You can't change His Majesty's thoughts on Hanseatic League merchants, and you have to know that the Hanseatic League is the Hanseatic League, and you, the Lloyd's family, don't exactly belong to the Hanseatic League. Chapter 117 The Earl of Warwick and Number 039, S family. As the new mayor of London, William Celsey has been cautious in his words and deeds since he became the mayor, for fear of causing any trouble, especially on the top of his head. Not only are there various nobles baring their fangs at him, but also the ministers of the Privy Council are also staring at him. After all, London, as the best developed and wealthiest city in England, should not reap too many benefits. Moreover, some ministers of the Privy Council and nobles were not elected, but he, who was born as a small commoner, became the mayor of London. Especially the stain that he had followed Duke Edward. Although Edward pardoned his uncle, the stains on his body could not be washed away. People would only envy him for having a nephew who was a king, and despise the mistakes he had made. It was already April, and the weather in England was getting warmer, but the temperature was still only a dozen degrees, and people were still wearing sheepskin coats. Mayor William has already adapted to the weather, but sitting in the conference room, he felt the temperature in the room rise sharply, and he seemed to be holding his breath. Today is the first meeting held by the London city government. Besides him, there are 9 other ministers of various government departments. As the mayor, he convened and presided over this meeting according to his rights, and the main content of this meeting was health issues. Yes, that's right, Edward could no longer stand the squalor of London, which, as the capital of a country, became a rat's nest. The plague, also known as the Black Death, first hit England in 1348 and continued intermittently for more than 300 years. During these 300 years, England lost nearly 1/3 of its population due to the plague. As we all know, rats are bred from a dirty environment, and London has suffered a lot because of environmental problems. Historically, when the plague arrived in 1665, more than 60,000 to 70,000 people died in the London area alone. In just 3 months from June to August 1665, London's population fell by 1/10. By August 1665, there were 2,000 deaths per week, and as many as 8,000 in September. The plague spread from London. The British royal family fled London, and the rich people in the city also fled with their families in a hurry. Cambridge residents loaded their luggage in carriages and evacuated to the countryside. In the city of London, more than 10,000 houses were abandoned. Some of them nailed the doors and windows with pine boards, and the houses with patients were marked with crosses with red chalk. That's why Edward asked William to clean up the hygiene situation in London after he took office. After all, the plague was too terrible, and he didn't want to travel through it again. In history, the demise of the Ming dynasty has nothing to do with the plague. The plague at the end of the Ming dynasty was a great plague. The children in the neighborhood were never seen. There were coffins, and there were no coffins, and there were more than 200,000 people in the 9 gates from August to December in 1643. It is conservatively estimated that the death toll in Beijing was as high as 1/5 of the city. So when Li Zicheng attacked Beijing, the capital of the Ming Empire, in April of the following year, what he faced was a dead city where people and ghosts are mixed together, and people dare not walk at sunset. His immediate boss, His Majesty the King, personally ordered him one by one. For his own position, but also to make a good impression in front of the king, he will complete the task ordered by His Majesty the King today. However, the new head of the city management office, the Earl of Southampton, Thomas Leo Shelley, this old fox, actually asked him to suspend the execution. When the Earl of Southampton was nursing at home, he suddenly received a letter from London. The contents made it difficult for the lost Earl to calm down. As a veteran in the political arena, he had waited too long for the news of the C's return to London. Therefore, even if he was the director of a small city management office, he worked hard to go to London to send loyalty to Edward. In fact, Edward had considered the position of the director of the city management office for a long time. City management, especially sanitation, is very complicated, and an old, cunning, and politically experienced guy must be in charge. The Earl of Southampton fell into Edward's vision. The old man joined Edward early in the morning. Edward originally wanted to use this guy's power in the Navy, but who knew that Baron Thomas suddenly appeared and tried to use the Navy to seize power. This made Edward plan to use the army to seize power in vain, and the Earl of Southampton was naturally left idle. Mr. Mayor, you must know that there are a lot of people who violate the regulations, and among them, there are several members of the city council who have illegally built their houses. Besides, how do you know if there are those nobles and the minister of the Privy Council in the shop who want to demolish the shares? After taking a sip of tea, Earl Thomas said unhurriedly, completely ignoring our Mayor William's angry appearance, you have to understand that this is not a small matter. If one is not handled well, we will suffer a lot. Seeing the Earl of Southampton put on a look of experience, Mayor William felt that there was no fire in his heart. Resisting his urge to lose his temper, gritted his teeth, William said with a very calm expression, His Majesty the King has already issued an imperial decree, requesting the nobles and ministers to unanimously cooperate with the city government in this action. Besides, the police department is always on standby. This operation is not difficult. I don't believe anyone dares to stop our actions. The Minister of the Privy Council and the Chief of the Police Department, Earl Boswell, also said in cooperation. Yes, that's right. I don't believe anyone dares to stop His Majesty's order. At that time, our police department will let them know what the responsibility of the police is. After Duke Edward lost power, Earl Boswell immediately turned to His Majesty the King. Edward felt that there was no one available, so he was allowed to make up for it and concurrently served as the chief of the Metropolitan Police Department. My Earl, you have only been away from London for a few years. Why are you getting less and less courageous? Mr. Mayor, don't disappoint His Majesty's expectations. Work hard. I believe in you. You will succeed. Earl Boswell looked down on this political loser, and if His Majesty the King hadn't tolerated him, he would have driven him away by himself. He casually expressed his support for Mayor William, and did not forget to laugh at the Earl of Southampton. Okay, Mr. Mayor, I will cooperate with you, but if there is a problem in the future, don't come to me. Throwing down these words, the Earl of Southampton glared at Earl Boswell, and left the conference room angrily. And Earl Boswell didn't even look at him. He slowly picked up the tea in his hand, and took a sip with a look of endless aftertaste. The other directors didn't say much. After all, these two people were the ones with the highest titles and the most weight. Okay, now, Mr. Wardflow, your port and wharf should also be cleaned up. After you go back, you have to give me a plan, a management plan for the port and the wharf. Also, Mr. Howard, your finance department is now preparing a budget, and we need to use a sum of money to replan the city. Just when our Lord Mayor William started his great project of transforming London, our former Privy Councillor, Lord John Dudley, Earl of Warwick, was enjoying lunch at his home eating the cheese in front of him. Earl Warwick's mood was as calm as water, without the slightest look of surprise. Even at this time his eldest son was reading a letter written to him by his friend Bishop Thomas himself. My dear Monsieur Earl, I am deeply sorry for what happened to you. It's all those dirty and hateful businessmen who maliciously falsely accused you, and these misunderstandings happened. I have personally explained this matter to His Majesty the King, and His Majesty deeply regrets this misunderstanding. Your Majesty said that he already knew about the grievances you have received, and he personally promised me that he will not issue a warrant to you again. Also, stop the Dark Blade and the Star Chamber Court from hunting you and your entire family. You are safe now, my friend, and God bless you. Your old friend Thomas Cranmer. When the eldest son Thomas received the letter, he was as happy as eating honey, and couldn't wait to read the letter from London to the whole family. Father, Mother, we are safe now and can go back to London. Thomas is in his 20s. After reading this letter, he suddenly couldn't help crying. He couldn't wipe away his tears, just like a child. Not only he was crying, everyone sitting at the table eating, except the Earl of Warwick, wept into tears. God knows how they came here these days. They sailed to Northumberland in the dark in a frightened boat. After that, the family stayed on the ship in the port of Northumberland, not daring to go out, and they didn't dare to sleep deeply at night, because they were always worried that His Majesty the King would come to capture them alive at night and send them to the guillotine. But the Earl of Warwick has been planning when to escape to Edinburgh, the place where the Scots are. Of course, this is just the worst method in the Earl's mind, and he won't use it until the last moment. Moreover, his target would only be the French, and he would not pay attention to the group of barbarians in Scotland. Besides, staying in Scotland was not safe. Father, can we go back to London? After crying for a while, the eldest son looked at the Earl of Warwick expectantly and asked, Don't be delusional. There is no hint of letting me go back to London in this letter. Let's go back to our hometown. I haven't been back for a long time. I'll take you to see our real home," the Earl of Warwick sneered, breaking the expectation of the whole family. Chapter 118 Urban Renovation. As an ordinary member of the bottom of society in London, Ham is just a porter on the dock at the age of 20. He already had 2 sons. In order to support his family in London, he had to get up early every morning and go to work at the Port of London just like most English people. He has never been educated to read and write. In his impression, he doesn't know any other cities except London. Even if cargo ships from France and Germany docked at the London dock more than once, sailors were heard more than once praising the beauty of Paris, Hamburg and other cities. However, he still stubbornly believes that all cities are no different from London, and they are not even as vast as London. At least until now, he has not completely walked through the streets of London carefully. Had the lunch he had at noon, a small piece of black bread into his bosom. This was his lunch, of course. He didn't want to enjoy 3 meals a day like a nobleman, but he carried goods every day, and if he didn't have a meal at noon, the whole person would not be able to support it until dark. The sky in London was still a little grey, so he bid farewell to his wife and 2 lovely sons, headed to the Port of London, and started his work. Along the way, there were people defecating everywhere on the side of the road. He was used to this, because he was also such a person. As long as it was not near his home. Wearing shoes made of tattered canvas brought back from the pier, Ham carefully walked around piles of excrement, waving his hands from time to time, otherwise those tiny green flies would get into your nose. That's good for you. After walking for half an hour, he finally arrived at the pier. When he arrived, he saw that there seemed to be a new announcement posted on the usual public notice wall, and a dozen people gathered together, discussing it, and it was very lively. He has always been honest and has no interest in these things. He knows that there are new arrest warrants, large bounties issued, or some other decree. He is very self-aware that these major events have little to do with him as a poor man. With this little time, he might as well carry an extra sandbag. Standing silently behind a long line of laborers, Ham looks forward to a good harvest. In this way, after staying for a whole morning, the number of ships docking in London is only half of the usual amount, and the work is also very light. Except for the part handed over to the gang, he probably won't be able to earn his own food expenses today. At noon, he sat under the shadow of a cargo ship docked at the pier to block the glare of the sun. For today's scene, he felt very depressed, and when he thought of his wife and son who was waiting to be fed, he felt very distressed. "Hey man, what's the matter with you today? You look so unhappy." The laborer working with him at the side looked at Ham with a bitter face, and asked involuntarily, "Alice, today's work is much less than yesterday's. I'm afraid my wife and son will starve again today." "Yeah, I didn't expect to have so little work today. I promised my wife to bring a chicken leg to my son. I'm afraid it will fail." Hearing what Ham said, the worker who asked the question frowned, smiled bitterly, and sighed while the two were lamenting and sighing, as the boss of the dock workers, a middle-aged man wearing a shiny tall hat, pretending to be leaning on a black cane, and dressed like a gentleman, came over. If you ignore the bald top of his head under his hat, he actually looks more like a gentleman. The labor boss walked slowly to the place where everyone was resting, and stopped with his head held high. With a haughty look on his face, Ham knew that this bald man was the co-boss of himself and several nearby peers, Davron, a self-proclaimed gentleman, although he usually looks polite. And he will imitate those gentlemen and say some ridiculous things. However, Ham would never underestimate him, because he once saw the bosses of other docks leading a group of vicious laborers to rob the dock. But Davron just smiled and chatted with the boss of the dock for a while, then took out a sharp axe from behind, and slammed it on the boss's head, causing soy milk to come out of his head. At this time, Ham realized that the human brain was originally composed of soybean milk, and the younger brothers brought by the boss with white soy milk on their heads were all frightened. Davron directly took down the pier, and his power expanded again. "Dear fellas, how was your day?" Davron gracefully moved the black crutch in his hand, helped his black-framed eyes by the way, and asked in a personal voice, "Boss, there is not much work today. Everyone is having a hard time." Immediately, a bearded supervisor bent over and walked over, with a flattering smile, and said like a dog, "Fuck. Oh, I told you all, don't call me boss anymore, call me sir. Believe it or not, I will break your dog legs." Davron, who had just accidentally uttered foul words, immediately changed his tone, but still said in a rage, "Yes, yes, sir. Brothers have very little work today." The burly man with the beard hurriedly apologized, then repeated himself, "Really? It's such a frustrating thing. However, I came here today to bring a good thing, so that the brothers can relax." and I will definitely not let them have enough to eat." Dover patted his chest and said loudly with a confident smile, "Really? Boss, you are really amazing. That's right, you don't even look at who I am." Doverin, this flattery was slapped at the right time, and it tickled his heart. "I've said it all. Call me sir from now on, sir. I think you owe it to me." After thinking about it, Doverin directly picked up the pretending crutch, swung it up and hit him, and the fierce big man jumped around in pain. Boss, it hurts. It hurts. It hurts." The big man didn't dare to confront Doverin, so he could only avoid it. After feeling that Doverin was hitting harder, his mind finally turned around. "Yes sir, I was wrong, until the big man cried out in pain more than a dozen times. Doverin stopped and rubbed his somewhat sore wrist. Beating people also requires a certain amount of effort. For a little brother like a big man, the beating must make them hurt, not hurt them. For opponents or strangers, you need to make them hurt without pain. Guys, the council is going to clean up the streets of London, but they don't have enough staff, so they hired us to clean up everyone. Not only is there a piece of black bread as a reward every day, but also 3 meals. Yes, 3 meals. You are just like the noble lord, eating 3 meals a day." Doverin, who stopped, took a breath and said to the many workers who turned a blind eye, "That's great. Boss, thank you." After receiving a sound of thanks, Doverin left with half of the laborers and went straight to the streets of London's civilian areas and slums in order not to affect the business of the terminal. Dover arranged a rotation system, first leading half of the people to work for a day, and although it only works for half a day today, it is considered a day's worth, and Ham, who usually works honestly, was lucky enough to get this good job with Doverin. Dover was sitting in a cart and led the way in front. After reconciling with other groups of dock laborers, Ham and a group of more than 200 people followed behind. The mighty, dry streets immediately rose dust along the way. Carriages and pedestrians all stared wide-eyed and stood by the side of the road, making way for them. Half an hour later, Ham saw a street completely different from his impression. The streets that were originally bustling with people coming and going, and businessmen everywhere, are now full of working people. The commercial atmosphere is gone. Laborers like him, wearing short jackets and short sleeves, bent over in full swing. Those wooden shovels, stone shovels, or even better iron shovels, shoveled and shoveled the rubbish on the street onto the carriage beside them. Seeing all this, Doverin, who had stopped in front, got out of the car and said to the hundreds of workers behind him, "Everyone, you can work now. Remember, I will pick up the bread after the sun goes down in the afternoon." As soon as he finished speaking, Ham, like all laborers, mustered his strength and started to work. "Your Majesty, please, because there are not enough people, I will follow your advice. I will start using bread to attract those idle workers in London, and organize them to clean up the streets together, under the leadership of William Celsey." Edward came to this famous slum in London and personally inspected it. "Oh, it looks pretty good." "Very good, Mr. William. According to this progress, the whole of London will soon be transformed." Edward looked at the bustling crowd, and saw the street that was free from a thick layer of garbage and dirt, and saw the sun again, so he couldn't help nodding. Seeing His Majesty the King with a smile on his face, William knew that the direction of his efforts was not wrong, and he couldn't help feeling more confident in his heart. "Your Majesty, due to the continuous concentration of London's population for hundreds of years, the entire city is overwhelmed, so I want to replan London." "Yes, my Mr. Mayor, your idea is very good. I support it, and strongly support it. However, you must know that the population of London is conservatively estimated to be 100,000. You must take care of the emotions of these people." For Edward's support, Mayor William couldn't help but be overjoyed. This very good opportunity for political achievements has been obtained, and it will definitely bring great help to his future political career. "Your Majesty, you know this. Due to the fact that the finance department has just been established, the money may not be enough. I hope the Privy Council will support it." Chapter 119 Fermentation. "Really? But you know, the Chancellor of the Exchequer is still putting on a sour face, so that everyone owes him tens of thousands of pounds. You can't count on the Privy Council, but I can give you an idea." Looking at Mayor William, whose complexion changed a little, Edward smiled, turned his eyes to his white and tender hands, and then said casually, "Oh, my lord. I wonder if I may have the honor of hearing this great method." Although William didn't have much confidence in Edward's idea, but the courtiers wanted to act around the king, and it was normal to flatter him. William bowed his head forward and said respectfully to Edward. Only now did Edward raise his head, and shot at the coolies working all around, and those who collided with his eyes from time to time could only lower their heads hastily. "My Mr. Mayor, Look, how are these houses? Edward pointed to the dilapidated common houses that were rickety by the side of the road and repaired with wood from time to time, and asked William behind him. William looked at the houses that exuded corruption and had a big hole in the gate or wall. He blinked his eyes and looked carefully again. William is very familiar with these dilapidated wooden houses. He has lived in such an environment since he was a child. Your Majesty, there are many houses like this in London, but for 2 floors like this, it costs at least £50. Although he hasn't been back to the civilian area for a long time, he is quite familiar with all this. After all, he still has many relatives who still live in the civilian area. Really? What about the relatively complete house next to it? About £60. What if the house not only looks beautiful, has a toilet, but there is no rubbish around, and there are trees and flowers? Your Majesty, it will cost hundreds of pounds. But, Your Majesty, in London, only the wealthy districts have such houses. With doubts, William said in cooperation with Edward, of course I know that it is only found in wealthy areas, but if it appears in a civilian area, how much do you think it will cost? Edward looked at those dilapidated houses, and said with a sigh, as if he was blaming them for being so precious. William felt that the king's obscenity could not be interrupted at this time. But he thought it was necessary to let the king know the current situation in London. Your Majesty, at present, there are very few wealthy businessmen and gentlemen who have settled in London, and they have no intentions. In fact, the dirty environment in London may be used to buy ordinary people. But it is unbearable for gentlemen and aristocrats living in spacious and comfortable manors in the countryside. They are not unaware of the benefits of living in the political centre of London. However, the intermittent bubonic plague in London, which lasted for almost 200 years, frightened away those interested in politics. Don't worry, my Mr. Mayor, I already know about these situations. If you want to alleviate a financial crisis now, you only need to spend all the money in London's finances to buy a slum and build a batch of simple inns. In 3 months, I think, you will make a lot of money. After saying the words that reminded him, leaving Mayor William, who was still thinking about it, Edward walked directly to the streets that had been cleaned up under the original dark face. There are large pieces of polished stones, some of which are stone pavement bricks left over from the Roman period. Edward stepped on a few times with his feet, and it felt like stepping on smooth tiles. With the rough texture of stone, my Mr. Mayor, you only need to do one thing now, to wipe out all the rats in London, and all these dirty streets and alleys must be cleaned up by me. Edward's words interrupted Mayor William, who was thinking, yes, Your Majesty, this is the goal that I and the city government are going all out for now. William quickly ran over, and after getting closer to Edward, he spoke softly. I like you, Mr. Mayor. This is your chance to show off. Edward didn't go over to see how the hard laborers used various tools to clean up, because he was afraid of nausea just quietly looking at the sweating laborers in the distance. I don't know what is going on in my heart, and Mayor William is silently accompanying me. Okay, Mr. Mayor, let's go. Edward looked at these medieval poor for about 3 minutes, then turned and left, boarding an ordinary carriage. Edward and William left directly, and the laborers, who have been working hard, don't know that their mayor and king came to them to watch them work. Norwich is the central city of Norfolk County in East Anglia, England. At present, it is the second largest city in England after London. As early as 1066, it was already one of the largest cities in England. From the early 14th century to the late 18th century, it was the largest textile city in England. Now, it is not only a distribution centre for cattle, horses, livestock, and grain in nearby counties and villages, but also has a well-developed processing industry for agricultural products such as brewing and flour, and is also well known for brick making, leather, printing, chemical, leather shoes, and clothing industries. In the Middle Ages, cities with developed handicrafts were generally prosperous due to the developed handicraft industry. In Norwich, there are various shops on the street, such as grain shops, clothing shops, shoe shops, banks, blacksmith shops, bars, carpentry shops, leather shops, etc., thus forming a lively scene on the street. Seymour's father was a blacksmith, so he was different from ordinary civilians. The rich father gave himself the surname Smith. Smith means blacksmith, expressing his father's expectation for the succession of the family business. In the Middle Ages, although the job of blacksmith was a little harder, he was a high-tech industry, and his life was much better than that of carpenters, leather craftsmen, and coopers. But as the youngest of the 3 sons, Seymour was not as strong as his 2 older brothers when he was born, so it was difficult for him to inherit the glorious profession of blacksmithing. Moreover, his father only had a blacksmith shop, which was to be passed on to his eldest brother. And his second brother would also own a blacksmith shop because he married the daughter of the neighbor Uncle Mike's family, and the poor man is not only physically unsuitable for the bright profession of blacksmithing, but also has not married a wife with a rich dowry like his second brother, so at the age of 16, he is still not married, of course. The daughters of other commoners can also marry, but his father has been committed to marrying him a woman who was born as a blacksmith, and Norwich has a population of 20,000, and there are only more than 30 households of blacksmiths. Everyone knows the basics, so how could they marry their daughter to someone who is not a blacksmith? Shaking his head, Seymour shook off those troubles, calmed down, and started to go to the bookstore to buy books. After becoming hopeless as a blacksmith, he began to study law with the encouragement of his father and mother. Because Norwich has been prosperous for several centuries, the ground of the entire city is paved with blue bricks, and this has always been a place that Norwich people talk about since the whole city is basically dominated by handicraftsmen. The atmosphere for reading is very weak. Sal searched all over Norwich, but there were only 3 bookstores. This time he will go to the bookstore in the center of the city, which is also the largest bookstore in Norwich. The bookstore doesn't have any signboard, it just hangs a flag with the shape of a book as the sign of the bookstore. The owner of the bookstore is an old retired lawyer, so there are many books about law and history here. The only disadvantage is that the books are too expensive. Even with his family's level, it is difficult to consume a few books. "Hey, Wyatt." Seymour walked into the bookstore with few people, and greeted the bald old man with reading glasses on the counter. "Hey, Sewell," the old man said without looking up at the thick book in front of him that looked like a dictionary. "Today, I bought another batch of new legal explanations. If you want to buy them, just give me £3. Of course, according to the usual practice, you only need to copy 2 copies, and you can read here every day." After saying this, Wyatt closed his shriveled lips, and began to read the book seriously again. Sewell thought about it, touched his pocket, and decided to copy 2 copies. His pocket money was only 5 pence. Seymour went directly to the location of the new book, glanced at it, and quickly found the explanation of the new law, picked up a copy, and walked to the place where it was copied. The copying place is not big, there can only be 5 tables in it, and the floor is full of book paper, quill pens, and ink. When Seymour came in, there were already 2 young people who were seriously transcribing. His arrival didn't disturb the 2 of them, and he didn't take the initiative to say hello, so he sat down at a random place, waved his arms, and started copying books. I don't know how long it took, until Seymour felt the darkness in front of him. He raised his head, and the other 2 people stopped like him. "Okay, it's getting dark, let's come back tomorrow," said one of the thin men with glasses. "Okay, come back tomorrow," Seymour said together with another curly-haired guy. The work of copying books is very complicated, not only requiring neat handwriting, but also good wording, so it takes him half a month to copy a book worth more than 100,000 yuan. "Wilson, Kellerau, why did you come so early today?" The 3 went out together, bid farewell to Wyatt, and went home together. "Sewell, Kellerau and I will go to London in a few days. I want to hurry up and finish the book that I didn't finish copying last time. We won't be able to move as fast as you." Thin Wilson shrugged helplessly at Seymour and said yes. "Then why are you going to London?" "What's the matter?" Seymour asked curiously. "Oh, my Sewell, don't you know that the City of London is recruiting officers from all over England? Moreover, this time, an examination is used to select the officials who will serve in London. We can also take the exam. As long as we are selected, even civilians can become officials." Curly-haired Claro couldn't help interjecting. Chapter 120. The Inn Area. Curly Claro and Thin Wilson, like Sewell, were of Norwich commoner origin. However, the curly-haired Claro's family runs a clothing store, while the skinny Wilson's family runs a perfume shop. The family members and relatives of dignitaries and wealthy businessmen and wealthy people in these 2 places have more contacts, so the source of information is better than the blacksmith and his family. Pave wide. However, the common feature of the 3 is that they are not the eldest son, so the possibility of the 3 inheriting the family business is extremely low. The goals of the 3 are the same, and they all take lawyers as their life goals. What's more, the people from his blacksmith shop are all repairing hose, helping caravan horses to hit horseshoes, and there are many trivial things in common people's homes. Besides, in that hot place, who has the mood to talk? Tell me the specifics. "Wilson, I want to know the details, in a hurry." Seymour tugged on Wilson's arm and urged the partner. "Okay, that's enough." Wilson rolled his eyes helplessly at Seymour, and said immediately, "This matter has to start with the abolition of the status of the London Borough a month ago, so people in the whole of England, you and me, as well as Kellerloo, can directly pass the exam and become a horse-riding and chariot-riding official, instead of needing some local prestige, a recommendation from a nobleman. Hey, Saville, Kellerloo, what kind of house do you think I will live in after I become an official? Marry a wife with a rich dowry? Hi." Souville, Kellerloo Wilson, who was daydreaming, called for a long time, but he didn't wait for his partner's answer, and then turned his head to look. At this time, his two partners both showed silly smiles, daydreaming just like him. "Hey. Well, you can do it. In 3 days, let's go to London together." After pushing the two of them and pulling them back from their fantasy, Wilson said in a cordial tone, "Hey, Wilson, you don't have enough money, do you want to rob us?" Sue Wire and curly-haired Claire took a step back and said with contempt on their faces, "Hey, what are you talking about? Do we still have to be so unreasonable about our relationship?" Wilson showed a wounded look, and said pitifully, "If you can catch up with us, I'll lend you some money." Saying that, Sue Wire took Kellerloo's hand and started running directly, and Wilson was stunned for a moment, then stepped forward, yelling and chasing after him. The three of them ran for a while, separated at another intersection, and returned home. Sewell's father was a blacksmith, so his family lived in what the Norwich people jokingly called Blacksmith Street. Even though the sun is about to set now, walking on this street, Sue Wire feels that the temperature has reached the level of noon in an instant, and the brightness is still very high, which does not hinder him from seeing the road. "Sue Wire, you're back from reading." On the side of the road, a middle-aged man who was drinking water greeted him. "Yes, I'm back," Sue Wire replied as he walked afterwards. The voices of greeting Sue Wire from both sides of the street came one after another, and the street, which was originally only the sound of iron hammering, suddenly became lively. Sue Wire responded one by one, without a trace of boredom on his face. "Look, Souville is so polite. No wonder the whole street likes him." The first strong man to greet Sue Wire took a sip of water, and casually sighed to the equally strong woman beside him. "Yes, it's a pity that his body is too thin to be a blacksmith, otherwise our daughter can marry him." The woman was big and thick, her palms were full of calluses, and she had a bucket waist, which was the common appearance of a blacksmith's daughter. Such a figure not only makes the girls good at housework, but also can help when necessary, and some women are even better than men at blacksmithing. "Yes. It's a pity. Let's not talk about it. The two of us will work overtime and finish these horseshoes quickly, and we will come to pick them up tomorrow." "Okay, let's get started." The man and the woman swung the hammer together and walked in again. Sue Wire didn't know that someone behind him was talking about him, and after walking for a while, he arrived at his home. It is no different from other iron shops. There is a flag with a hammer on it outside the door. When you enter the house, you will be greeted by a wave of heat. Beside the stove, two strong men are jingling there, with the one with the gray hair is his father Will, and the younger one is his brother Will Jr. The two were immersed in the joy of labor and did not care about Sue Wire's return. Going around the stove, Sue Wire saw the kitchen, and saw his mother washing the clothes of the father and son. "Mother," Sewell said loudly. "Oh, it's Sue Wire, I'm back from reading, get ready and eat." Sue Wire's mother also had a large figure and said with a doting smile, "Yes, I'll prepare right away." After finishing speaking, Sue Wire went back to his room, thinking about how to persuade his father to let him go to London in the evening. The family gathers at the table. Because the family is relatively wealthy, there is not only a grilled fish on their table, but also a pot of soup, radish, cabbage and mushrooms, which are delicious and fresh soup stewed together. Although they all ate black bread, there were no sawdust or stones in it, and the color was not too dark. He tore a piece of black bread in front of him into pieces and threw it into his bowl filled with soup. After the bread slowly softened, Sue Wire scooped it up with a wooden spoon and sent it to his mouth. "Father, I'm going to London. I hope you and my brother can understand me." When everyone was about to finish eating, Sue Wire began to tell his father and brother the news he had heard. "Sue will go. I believe you can do it. Our Smith family depends on you." After hearing the news, his father thought for a while with a dark face, and then said decisively, "Yes, Sue Wire, I support you to go. After passing the exam, I can show off that I have a younger brother who is an official." His elder brother, Will Jr., was the same as his father, with a bronzed body and strong muscles, which was inversely proportional to Sue Wire's thin body. He looked extremely sturdy. No wonder those nobles like blacksmiths. They are good materials for soldiers. Little Will treats Sue Wire well, not only because he is the youngest in the family, especially because he is not a threat to the family property at all. For little Will's support, old Will was very happy, but his wife's face was a little ugly. "Sue Wire, when are you leaving?" Sue Wire's mother asked with concern, and the wrinkles on her face seemed to be more in 3 days. "I will go with Kellerau and Wilson, haha. Sue Wire, strive to become a high-ranking official, and our Smith family will also be high-ranking figures in the future." Old Will seemed to think of something wonderful, and couldn't help laughing any more. A dinner ended in such a pleasant atmosphere. 3 days later, Sue Wire rented a carriage together with Kellerau and Wilson, and started the long journey, more than 140 kilometers, about 90 miles. The three set for 3 days, and finally arrived in London on March 19. "Three gentlemen, London is here." The coachman was a 30-year-old man with a very loud voice. Hearing the sound, the three hurriedly opened the curtain of the carriage, and shut with curious eyes. In front of the carriage was a congested river, the Thames, which was the main artery of traffic in the city of London. Royal flat-bottomed barges, large cargo ships, and small boats of the people shuttled endlessly on the river, turning the spacious river into an artery of wealth in an instant. Pedestrians on land must pass through London Bridge if they want to cross the Thames River, and carriages like Sue Will's group are also waiting in line, and the long waiting line waits slowly and calmly. Of course, ordinary people are waiting here, and the rich have already crossed the river by ferry. London Bridge was built around the end of the 12th century. There are 2 rows of houses on the bridge supported by 20 stone arches, leaving only a narrow passage for pedestrians and vehicles. Not far from the Thames River, Sewell saw a place called Rudman East. On the top of a hill stood the ancient St. Paul's Cathedral. The three looked at the cathedral surrounded by stars, and immediately bowed their heads in prayer. After a while, the carriage of the three slowly passed London Bridge. The carriage finally stopped at a place, but to their surprise, this was not a carriage shop, but a place similar to an area. The ground here is not only clean, but also free of rubbish, which is very different from Norwich. What surprised them even more was that there were some people wearing uniforms on the side of the road with brooms cleaning up the garbage that fell on the ground at any time. In this strange place, there are dozens of wooden double-story inns. Although each inn looks like it is newly built, it is very lively with people coming and going. This place was a place specially bought by Mayor William, and in an area in London was built. Although he didn't quite understand what Edward meant, he upheld the principle that what His Majesty did was right. He reluctantly set aside £200 from his tight finances, and sent people to build more than a dozen simple 2-story inns, and then found some idle unemployed people, and the famous inn district in London came out when he was ready to lose money. Who knows, people from other places began to stay in an endless stream. Soon, the supply of more than a dozen inns began to exceed the demand, and he recovered the cost within a week. Just when he was happily preparing to build an inn, those London businessmen had already heard of this business opportunity and began to build an inn nearby, doubling the original inn's revenue. The three of Sue Wire looked at the bustling and noisy inn in front of them. The three couldn't help but looked at each other, and then they found one together and walked in. Chapter 121 Registration Office. Walking into the inn, what appeared in front of the three of Sue Wire was not a beautiful waiter, nor a high-end and luxurious decoration. None of these, just a long queue, a queue waiting in line. Most of the team are young people like them, and they all look very polite. They know that these are the opponents they are about to face. In desperation, the three could only choose to line up behind silently. Fortunately, the speed was very fast. After the three of them waited for 5 minutes, it was their turn. "Sir, how many of you are there?" An ordinary-looking girl sat at the counter and asked Sue Wire and the others softly. Although there were still some sawdust on the counter, which affected the mood of Sue Wire and the others, they were still polite. "Miss, 3 rooms." Wilson, who had the better language skills among the three, said, "Okay, sir, how long do you need to stay? Let's live for a month first." "How much do we need each?" Wilson thought about it, and finally decided to book for 1 month, and then just renew the lease after the expiration. "Good, sir. According to the standard of 5 pence per day, it is 6 shillings plus 6 pence a month. Since you are 3 people together and you are renting for a relatively long time, you only need 6 shillings per person." The receptionist at the counter showed a pleasant smile, and quietly calculated the accounts for the three of them. The three of them discussed for a while, although they felt that the price was a little unacceptable, but this is in London, and the general price is probably the same. The three of them reluctantly paid 6 shillings, their faces full of heartache, but the smile on the face of the receptionist at the counter became brighter and brighter. "You know, in this era when the middle class in society such as farmers and yeomen's only have an annual income of £50 or £60, 6 shillings can be said to be a yearly surplus for ordinary families." Taking the key, He came to the room where the three of them belonged under the guidance of the male server. Sir, these 3 rooms are your rooms, please keep the keys safe. Pointing to the 3 adjacent rooms, the waiter left automatically after finishing speaking. Okay. See you tomorrow, brothers. Seymour shrugged at Kellerau and Wilson, tilting his head and said, see you tomorrow, Seymour. Me too. Wilson and Kellerau nodded one after another, opening the wooden door. A wooden bed appeared in Seymour's eyes, plus a wooden table, and a large wooden cabinet. These were all the equipment in this room. Taking out a linen quilt and a wooden pillow from the wooden cabinet, Seymour directly threw the package in his hand into the wooden cabinet, and then lay down on the bed. The next day, Seymour got up to rinse his mouth, and woke up the other 2 who were still sleeping. The 3 went directly to the hall to start breakfast. While eating bread, the 3 chatted about some scenery and legends they saw on the road. Let me tell you, aren't we going to pass the exam this time? The content of this exam was determined by His Majesty the King himself. At the side table, 4 young people in their 20s chatted while eating. At this time, England is not as strict as later generations when eating, but eats and chats like the Chinese, which is also a way for them to promote relations among them. A guy who looked older said loudly, as if he was very proud of knowing this. TCH, but, when we went to sign up yesterday, wasn't that what was posted on the notification board? You think we can't read? Sitting at the side, one of the clever-looking guys mercilessly slapped him, not giving him any face. Ha ha ha. I'm afraid that the 2 of them won't see it. Since everyone knows it, I won't say it. The young man named Bud touched his head and smiled to ease his embarrassment, but the words were unintentional, and the listeners were interested, but the 3 Sioux people on the side were very excited when they heard it. They felt that it was worthwhile for them to come back. Hey, Saville, Kellerau, do you hear me clearly? This time His Majesty the King personally set the test. His Majesty the King attaches great importance to this recruitment exam, Wilson said very happily. A feeling of honor poured into his chest. Hey, you have to figure it out. It seems that you have to sign up for this exam. Seymour held back the excitement in his heart, and interrupted Wilson, who was full of excitement. Yes. We seem to have not signed up yet. Kellerau, who was belatedly aware of it, shouted in shock. Wilson, let's sign up quickly, or it will be too late. Kellerau picked up the bread in front of him, looking like he was dispatched urgently. Kellerau, don't be in a hurry. Let's go after eating. Seymour held the anxious Kellerau and said, Seymour, let's eat while walking. Go early and come back early. Seeing this, Wilson shook his head, and immediately persuaded Seymour. Seymour had no choice but to compromise, and walked with the 2. At this time, His Majesty the King of England is inspecting the cleaning results of the London city government. Your Majesty, look, it used to be a dump of rubbish, but now it's as clean as a mirror. And there are no more flies flying around. Mayor William pointed to the corner of the street ahead, and said to Edward beside him. Edward looked along his fingers, and the alleys that used to be full of excrement and urine were now washed like water, revealing the bottom stone slabs. However, the weather-beaten stone slabs are unevenly arranged, some are broken, some are raised, and some of the stone slabs are covered with grass and weeds. In short, at this time, the disgusting dung-gathering place finally revealed its true face. Your Majesty, in order to prevent people from urinating everywhere, I not only built toilets in some corners, moreover, I also set up a duty system and ordered the personnel of the city management office to patrol normally. Every time we catch a person, we will let him disturb the toilet for a day. Mayor William spoke respectfully in front of Edward, but there was still a smug expression on his face. Hearing this, Edward immediately looked at a few middle-aged men in obvious uniforms who were staggering around with a rapier on the street and glanced at them. Although these people looked like hooligans, Edward could only accept it. My Excellency the Mayor, train these people in the future. Don't keep looking at them. They are like hooligans, and they will damage the image of the city government. Edward made some comments casually, but there was still a look of approval on his face. Mr. Mayor, your arrangement is quite good so far. This is a good idea. With that said, the 2 came to the registration point. The registration point is located in the West End of London, which is the same as the test site. This place was originally the ruins of a church on fire, and then our Mayor William used the waste to become a test place for these young people who came to take the exam. Your Majesty, look, it used to be a church here, but now it has been raised, and I sent people to build these wooden sheds. Edward followed Mayor William's finger and got out of the carriage. Looking at the grassy place in front of him, there are still a few remains of the burned church on the flat ground, and the angel with wings can be vaguely seen on the wall, as well as the remains of an old man who is missing an arm on the wreckage. Small wooden compartments were erected. The compartments were surrounded by walls on 3 sides, and the exit was covered by a linen cloth. The compartment is about 6 feet high and 5 feet wide. With unobstructed views, there is a table and a chair in the compartment, although there is a fork and a few green leaves on the table and chair. Such compartments are arranged in rows. Each compartment is 3 feet apart. Very regular. Edward visually observed that there are more than 1,000 of these small cubicles, and they are neatly arranged there, which is quite spectacular. Although Mayor William did this to save money, it is very similar to the Imperial Examination Room in ancient China. My Mr. Mayor, you are also your masterpiece. Edward glanced at Mayor William, who was a little embarrassed to see people, and said with a smile, "Yes, my lord, you know that the city government really doesn't have much money for this pot." William did not hesitate to recite it, but instead he poured bitter water in front of Edward. "Okay, I know your poverty. But this time I will spare you, and next time I will build them into stone bricks. There are a lot of fires in London," Edward reminded casually, and then looked at the registration office not far away where people came and went. Regarding this point, William felt very sympathetic, and the fire in London could not be described in a single sentence. In fact, since London's buildings and houses are all wooden structures, the number of fires that occur every year has been beyond calculation, and Londoners have turned a blind eye. The plague and fire are the problems that Londoners often face. The registration point is located at the upper left of the test site, which is the back door of the original church. About half a mile away from Edward's position at this time. Edward was going out in normal clothes at this time, and so was Mayor William behind him, so no one bothered him. Just when he was about to move his legs, a pair of hands patted Edward's shoulder. "Hey, sir. Do you know where the registration office is?" The shoulder was patted, and Edward was stunned for a while. Since he came to England, no one has patted him on the shoulder except Elizabeth. Edward stopped the guards who were about to come not far away with his eyes, and also stopped Mayor William, who was on the side in front. "Go by yourself." Edward turned around and said indifferently, his eyes were very flat, "Okay, sir, thank you." Sue Wire, who was on the side, noticed something was wrong at this moment, and pulled Wilson away, who was about to have a big talk. "Your Majesty." Mayor William hurried over and asked softly, "Nothing." Continue. Chapter 122. The performance of Henry VIII. Edward said indifferently, and walked to the registration point with Mayor William on the other side. Wilson was dragged by Sue Wire and walked towards the registration office. "Hey, Sue Wire, I just said hello. What's wrong with you?" Wilson broke free from Sue Wire's pull, shook his arm, and asked curiously, feeling very puzzled, "Hey, buddy, don't you see the little gentleman with some bodyguards behind him? This kind of person can be seen as a big shot at a glance. Let's not provoke him. It will." "London, the water here is very deep." Sue Wire gritted his teeth and whispered in his ear, then went straight to the registration point without hesitation, and Wilson and Queraux also followed in 3 steps and 2 steps. Without saying a word on the way, it is said to be a registration point, but it is actually a long table with 3 literate young people sitting there. They are all temporary government employees. Although the 3 of them were sitting there, they looked lazy and couldn't lift their strength. "Hey, where are you 3 from? What's your name?" The young man sitting in the middle looked tired, as if he was too tired. "Wilson, Sewell, Claro, from Norwich, Norfolk." Wilson stopped the 2, took a step forward, and answered in place of the 3 here, "This is the brand of the 3 of you. Come here for the exam on April 28th. Now, each of you sign your name for me." Immediately, a piece of paper with signed names was placed in front of the 3 of them. The 3 found an empty space and filled in their names. "Remember, you must arrive before 9 o'clock in the morning," one person asked, while the other 2 held quill pens and wrote information on 3 wooden signs. The 3 of them got 3 pairs of wooden cards, went to the other side, and asked a carpenter to carve the original ink with a knife. The carpenter is very professional, and within 10 minutes, all 3 wooden plaques were carved. Sue Wire picked it up and saw a lazy lion engraved on the front, but on the back was his own description: 5 feet 3 inches tall, short brown hair, slim build, from Norwich. And Sue Wire looked at Wilson next to him, and his description was 5 feet 3 inches tall, with long black hair, a slightly fat body, and he was from Norwich. And Claro's 5 feet 2 inches tall, long brown hair, thin build, from Norwich. This is the description of the physical appearance of the 3 of them. It is simply not good enough. The 3 made fun of each other, and then left one after another, while Edward stood 10 feet away, watching carefully. "Your Majesty, we use wooden plaques to identify them, with their information engraved on them. In order to better identify them, we also ask them to leave their signatures, and we will compare them with each other during the exam, so that the chance of impersonation is very small." Edward watched carefully from the side, and Mayor William beside him was not idle. explaining to Edward in words. "Okay, let's go and see how the test papers are going." With a big wave of his hand, Edward took Mayor William and rode in a carriage to the suburbs of London. This place in the outskirts was researched by Edward with some priests from Oxford University and teachers from ordinary middle schools. Of course, he will not ask any difficult questions. At most, what is your belief? If your answer is Catholic, then you just say goodbye. Even if you get full marks for the rest of the questions, you will still be eliminated. If the answer is Anglican, then congratulations, you have passed the first hurdle. The rest are just common knowledge questions and answers, such as which is the state religion of England? Which family is the ruler of England? Besides, how many pennies is a piece of brown bread worth? Which is the capital of England? These are some common sense questions. Edward selects the person he needs through this test. Note that it is a person who knows basic English and can write. This is mainly based on the actual situation in England at present, although there are data showing that the literacy rate in England during the Renaissance was 10% to 30%, but this is just an optimistic statistic. In the whole of England and Wales, and in the area around Dublin in Northern Ireland, there were about 3.5 million university students under Edward's rule. There are only about 100 middle schools and elementary schools in total. Of course, there is also the necessary housekeeping school, plus some church-owned schools. There are only more than 3,000 people studying in total. The strange thing is that the richer people, such as nobles and wealthy businessmen, their children don't bother to learn knowledge. At most they can write their own names, but the common people at the bottom have no capital to learn. Only middle-class humanins, lawyers, craftsmen, and small capitalists would hire tutors to educate their children. This part of the people is the main target of Edward's examination and admission. Although these people's learning is somewhat one-sided, as long as they can read and understand documents, they will be fine. I came here to check it out. For these very simple questions, Edward didn't think there was any difficulty. Although most of the people in the government are mediocre, elites are still needed. After thinking about it carefully, Edward still felt that there should be a grand finale. Farmer Searle in London has a fence in which there are 2 animals, a rooster and a sheep. If you count from the bottom, there are 50 feet, and if you count from the top, there are 20 heads. Excuse me, how many sheep and how many chickens are on the fence, Your Majesty? Isn't this topic too difficult? Regarding the topic dictated by Edward, the bald scholar on the side asked with some doubts. His face was very embarrassed. It doesn't matter. The last question is for the most elite talents. I don't expect ordinary people to get it right. Seeing other scholars and priests agreeing, Edward turned around before leaving and said in a casual tone. A group of people looked at Edward's receding figure with doubts, and were speechless. The next day, Edward was having breakfast with little Lolita. Seeing little Lolly happily eating wheat porridge bite by bite, Edward also felt his appetite increased and ate an extra bowl. After eating, Lucy on the side came in and whispered into Edward's ear, while the little Lolita on the side was gnashing her teeth. Little Lolita seemed to be angry, her face puffed up. She looked at Lucy next to Edward angrily, and pursed her little lips after listening to Lucy's words. Edward was very puzzled to see little Lolita's appearance like this. Who made our Mary angry? Tell brother Edward, brother will help you teach him a lesson. As he said that, Edward's face showed a look of wanting to beat someone, and his eyes were still looking around. HMPH. It's all Sister Lucy. Brother Edward hit Sister Lucy. As she spoke, the little Lolly showed her canine teeth, grinned her rosy mouth, and wrinkled her little nose. Oh. Why, Lucy? Did Lucy do something to make you angry again? Edward asked with doubts on his face. Yes, little Mary, don't slander me casually. You say I'm wrong without proof, but you're going to get spanked, Lucy said so softly, but her right hand stretched out, making a gesture of spanking. Little Lolita hurriedly covered her butt, looking scared, but she still held her head high and said stubbornly, It's all Sister Lucy. Every time you come, brother Edward will have something to do, so he won't play with Mary anymore. As if she still couldn't let go of her hatred, she covered her buttocks with her left hand, stomped on the ground with her short legs vigorously, and the ponytail on her head was bouncing and bouncing. Haha, it turns out that's the case. Then can I take Mary with me this time? Edward looked at the angry little Lori with a smile, walked over, stroked her red hair, and said with a smile, Oh? Really? Little Lolita still couldn't believe it. She shook her head and looked into Edward's eyes and asked. After getting a positive reply from Edward, she jumped up and down happily, as if going to work with Edward was an exciting thing for her. Let's go, let's go, let's go to work. Little Lolly jumped and held Casey's hand standing aside, and dragged her back to her room. Let's go get ready too, Edward said to Lucy, who was following beside him, watching little Lolita's cheerful steps. Half an hour later, Edward was wearing aristocratic uniforms, a purple cloak, leather boots made of precious rhinoceros hide, and a yellow lion embroidered on the surface, but the little Lolita was wearing a long pink dress, with a butterfly hairpin on her head, light red lip gloss on her lips, and a little angel pendant around her neck, but in her arms was a bear toy that Edward gave her. Mary, why did you bring the bear out? Edward asked suspiciously. Brother Edward, little bear hasn't come out for a long time. I want to take him outside for a stroll. Little Lolly tilted her head and said in a delicate voice, with a very reasonable appearance, all right then. Let's go. Edward said, holding little Lolita's little hand. Edward led little Lolita in front, and Lucy, Luna, and Casey followed behind and got into the carriage together. Since it is a carriage dedicated to the royal family this time, it is very spacious, and it is not crowded at all when several people sit on it, driven by 3 horses. The carriage was driving in the middle, while 50 guards rode on horses, following around to protect Edward's safety. This time Edward and his party came out, mainly because the task he assigned to Udall had been successfully completed, and the actors had also rehearsed for nearly a month, but the performance was performed so. Before that, Edward sent people to invite some major ministers and nobles in London, as well as some rich and wealthy businessmen, to let them come to enjoy the performance together today. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 123, Curtain Call. On the morning of March 20th, the Shoreditch area was originally a gathering place for the poor and sinful, but at this time there were all kinds of gorgeous carriages passing by on the road. One carriage after another slowly passed through the streets of Shoreditch, and the crowded streets became even more congested at this time. This, combined with the unevenness of the streets in the original Shoreditch area, created a situation of carriage congestion. Of course, at this time, the poor dare not compete with these rich or noble people. They have no such qualifications. Therefore, a large number of poor people can only stand around, hoping to pass quickly. At this time, it is time to test your eyesight. People with low status should move away consciously, and let the carriages with high status pass first. It took a full 10 minutes of eye-splitting like this to get the order of passing through, and the whole street was able to flow smoothly. The pedestrians on the road were slowly relieved. After all, they didn't have as much time as these aristocratic lords. If they waste too much time, they will have problems with their daily livelihood. When the carriages finally passed, Zippa, who was guarding the roadside, breathed a sigh of relief. As a messenger, his duty is to deliver the letter to its proper place. Every day when he gets off, he will lie on his wooden bed, too tired to move or open his eyes. However, he cherishes this job very much. It is the source of his family's support. Fortunately, the traffic jam was not too long today, otherwise he would not be able to complete the task today. Hey, buddy, do you know why we have so many rich people here? Looking at the gradually clearing streets, Zippa couldn't help asking the smooth-looking guy beside him. Although there is a hole in his hat, the first impression of him in the eyes of others is that he is a smooth person. Hey, this matter has been spread for a long time. His Majesty the King invited the nobles and officials to go to the theater together. The sleek buddy smiled and shook his head with an envious expression on his face. What? Are you sure? His Majesty the King will watch dramas? Isn't that what us ordinary people with no money watch? Zippa feels that the world is not normal. God? His Majesty the King can watch what the poor like to watch. Yes. Who would have thought of this? Maybe His Majesty the King has changed his taste. You don't know about this. Behind the two of them, a thin monkey-like guy interjected. Zippa looked at the dozens of hats placed on the rags in front of him, and immediately knew his identity. A businessman with a street stall. I heard that Her Majesty Edward does not like hunting like his father, His Majesty Henry VIII, but likes watching dramas. Seeing Zippa and the others listening more seriously, the hat merchant spoke more flavorfully and moved his mouth faster. His Majesty the King not only sent people to buy the 4 major theaters including the Rose Theater, but also spent money to renovate them, and this time, His Majesty the King asked someone to write a drama book. And today he invites noble lords and rich businessmen to watch it together. It's going to be at the Rose Theater. Now hundreds of people are gathered around the theater, for fear of any accident. Tisk tisk. As he said that, the businessman couldn't help sighing and pouted, and around, the people who were crowded together also started to discuss. The content was similar, and it was nothing more than the content of the king watching a play. And the Hanseatic businessman Max Loitz, as a well-known businessman of the Hanseatic League in London, has a wealth of first-class wealth, So he also has a share in this invitation. The last time he heard that the London businessman begged to see Edward, he was frightened for a while, and he also quickly begged to see Edward, but Edward refused, so he left a gift of £500 and left after some time. He was relieved to find that Edward had not issued any regulations to deal with the Hanseatic merchants. However, he felt uneasy without seeing Edward in person. His carriage was the second batch to pass. Apart from the nobles, he followed the ministers and parliamentarians. Of course, there were also some top businessmen in London. In less than a moment, Mark came to the Rose Theatre, but the entrance of the theatre was painted with lime neat grids, and the size of those grids was exactly the size of a carriage. He also found that the closer the grid is to the entrance of the theatre, the higher his master status is, but the grid closest to the entrance of the theatre was empty. He knew that it was for the king, but his groom came to a grid that belonged to him under the guidance of a special person. With the support of the groom, Mark got out of the car and looked carefully, only to find that there was a small sign in front of each grid, and his sign read Mark Loitz in Latin. When he came to the theatre, he found that the walls of the theatre were red as a whole, and he also asked people to paint a lot of rose patterns on the walls. Even the gate is covered with rose patterns and greeted by 2 rows of beautiful and energetic girls. Mark walked into the theatre and a maid walked up to him, guided Mark, and took him to a back position. Beside him were also some businessmen from the Hanseatic League, and Mark hurriedly greeted them. Stand up. After some time, he heard a voice, and then he and the people around him all stood up. By the grace of God, Edward VI, King of England, France, and Ireland, husband of the Queen of Scots, keeper of the faith, head of the Church of England and Ireland, too. With a loud shout of the big man, everyone stood up together and bowed to Edward, who came at the door. Participate in your majesty. Edward walked in straight, without even looking at the people standing. He found the front box and sat down. After the ceremony, the etiquette officer said directly. Mark and a group of people sat down and began to enjoy the drama. As a successful businessman, he has almost figured out all about London. Drama is something that the common people at the bottom like to watch, and upper-class people, such as nobles, are basically unheard of. For them, it is a shameful thing to have a hobby with common people. Therefore, Bishop Thomas and Duke Houghton, who are currently sitting there, look confused. They have no idea what they are sitting here for. Basically, as soon as Edward sent an invitation letter, they directly ordered the housekeeper to prepare for action, and they didn't know the details. These senior nobles and important ministers of the Privy Council sat in the second row behind Edward, which was also a box seat. Suddenly, the red curtain opened on the stage ahead, and a well-dressed middle-aged man stood in the center of the stage. The middle-aged man bowed forward, and then said, "The large-scale historical drama Henry VIII has officially started." After speaking, people automatically left the stage, and a child came on stage. He was Henry VIII. Henry VIII was very magical when he was a child. When he was just born, lightning appeared in the sky, and a red cloud appeared above his mother's room. Once, he got lost in the forest because of his playfulness. When he was thirsty, he suddenly found a hot spring. When he was hungry, fruit fell from the tree. When he was tired and sleepy, a doe would warm him up miraculously. 3 days later, he automatically returned to his lost location and found his family. In short, since he was a miraculous person, people unconsciously liked him and were willing to help him, so he got a nickname, God's favorite boy. And then the villain Richard III appeared on the stage, and the actors described in detail how Richard III won the throne. And after he waited for the throne, there were droughts, floods, etc. in England, and the people of England were living in dire straits. The actors portrayed it very well, expressing the pain of ordinary people at the moment of disaster very well, and deeply reflecting the pain of the English people. Then it was to protect the heir of the Lancaster family, the 14-year-old Henry. Many nobles have gone through untold hardships and various difficulties, but under the care of God, they encountered various coincidences, which also interspersed with the ridiculous behavior and language of some stupid officials sent by Richard III when they captured Henry. After that, Henry VIII, under the guard of family guards and loyal nobles, finally came to Brittany, England's territory. In France later, when Richard III sent someone to assassinate and kidnap Henry VIII, he was cracked by the rational Henry. After that, the plot reached a climax, and King Richard VIII of France was very interested in the arrival of Henry VIII, so began a series of bets between Henry VIII and Richard VIII. Facing Richard VIII's 5 difficult problems, the witty Henry VIII used his clever mind, and under the blessing of God, he successfully avoided them one by one. After that, he was victorious and got some rewards. He was able to hire thousands of mercenaries to return to England and start to regain his throne, so the fantasy battle to regain the throne began. The 2,000 mercenaries led by Henry VIII, who had a smooth journey, fought against Richard III's 10,000-strong army. The details are omitted, but adhering to God's will, Henry VIII finally became king after 5 hours, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. This magnificent Henry VIII finally came to curtain call Edward, little Lolita, and a kind of invited ministers and nobles were also starving with Edward leading the charge. The play was finally a complete success, so, under the thanks of the actors, Edward took little Lolita's hand and walked out of the theater, and a group of ministers and nobles are still discussing the plot. There are both surprises in the boldness of the actors, who can actually play kings and nobles. And some people talk about the thrilling plot, but Edward returned to Whitehall Palace with little Lolly while waiting for him to eat. Lucy said that someone asked to see him. Chapter 124, Promulgating a Government Order. Damn, I'm sick. People come here every time I eat. Edward ate the white bread in his hand, which was like a hamburger bun. The bread was mixed with meat strips and vegetables. This is what Edward specially ordered the cook to do, so that the bread is not so unpalatable. Edward stopped the running bread, looked at the little Lolly who was sitting aside and was struggling with the goose legs, and continued to eat. Who is it? Edward took a big bite of the bread in his hand regardless of his image, and then put some chili sauce on it. Your Majesty, it's Hanseatic merchants Mark Lloyd's. Lucy said softly, pretending not to see it. Oh. Is that the Lloyd's family who buy our salt in England? Edward paused, then started eating again. Yes, he left £500 when he came last time. Oh, I see, this is a rich master. Edward sighed, swallowing the bread in his mouth. I'll meet him today and see what he has to say. Let him wait in the living room for a while, and I'll see him after I finish eating. Edward was still eating his own bread, chewing it constantly. Yes, Your Majesty. After receiving Edward's order, Lucy twisted her waist and walked out. After receiving Lucy's words, Mark felt unspeakable joy in his heart. Miss Lucy, this is my gratitude to you. Please subordinate. If it was another maid, Mark would not bribe her with money, but who told her to be His Majesty's maid? As long as she speaks a word in front of the king, his meeting will be for naught. This was not the first time someone gave her a gift. After taking a look, Lucy realized that it was a villa in a wealthy area of London, and it was estimated to cost around £300, which was a lot of wealth. Lucy gave Mark a good-looking look, and then accepted it, tacitly. His Majesty the King will come to see you after dinner in a while. Watch for yourself. Lucy, who was originally expressionless, finally showed a smile and revealed a little bit of tone. Okay, Miss Lucy. I will pay attention. Mark responded immediately, with a flattering smile on his face. Mark was spinning around in the living room bored, thinking about how to tell the little King of England in his mind. After about half an hour, Mark, who was bored in a chair, finally saw Edward's figure. Good day, His Majesty the King of England. Mark greeted him and bowed. Good day, Mr. Lloyd's. Edward nodded politely. After Edward entered the living room, he sat on the main seat, and immediately saw the businessman of the Lloyd's family of the Hanseatic League standing beside him, very polite. Oh, Mr. Lloyd's, sit down quickly. I am very impressed with the reputation of the Lloyd's family, Edward said with a surprised expression. Thank you, Your Majesty. Mark sat down politely after hearing Edward's words. Mr. Lloyd's, I don't know why you asked to see me. What's the matter? Just after eating, Edward took a sip of tea and moist in his throat. After all, he just ate bread. Your Majesty, the first thing I come here this time is to congratulate you on starting the government. This is really a pleasant thing for the people of England. The second thing is to give you some money. Oh, there is such a good thing. My Mr. Lloyd's, come and tell me about it. When money was mentioned, Edward raised his spirits and became interested. Although Edward currently owns two businesses that make money, the bar and the sale of liquor, who would think that the money is low? Your Majesty, you must be aware that the sea salt business is the main business of our Lloyd's family, and I stayed in London just to buy England's sea salt. I understand that. It's a good business. Edward couldn't help pursing his mouth and sighing. The importance of table salt is beyond doubt. It is a must for everyone in the Middle Ages, an era of underdeveloped technology. The importance of table salt was magnified a lot in the ancient Mesopotamia. Intelligent humans learned how to use salt, and they used it for military purposes. Whenever a city was destroyed, the ancient Assyrians and Hittites would sprinkle salt in the city to express the curse that the land here would become barren. The land with high salt content is not conducive to the growth of crops. Therefore, this is also the reason why there are so many deserts in the Mesopotamia. It is really an idea that harms others and oneself, and this custom spread to Europe and was carried forward in medieval wars. Salt was a precious commodity from the late Roman Empire until the Middle Ages. Merchants transported salt to the inland Germans via the Salt Road. In the Sahara Desert, The Tuareg people who are good at desert trade have always maintained a trade route exclusively for salt trucks to transport salt to the interior of the Sahel. A caravan could organize 40,000 camels. Sometimes caravans traded salt for slaves, and Timbuktu, on the southwestern edge of the Sahara, was once a thriving market for salt and slaves. By 1960, caravans still plying the desert were transporting 15,000 tons of salt a year, but now this trade has dropped to a third of what it was back then. Unlike our country, salt was nationalized as early as Emperor Wu of the Han Dynasty. In the Middle Ages, salt was always dominated by merchants. Monarchs and kings like Edward could only share some of the residue. Your Majesty, our Lloyd's family is willing to spend half of the annual purchase share to buy sea salt from you. That's about £500,000. We'll buy it directly from you. We pay 6 shillings a pound. Straight away, gritting his teeth, Mark said with determination, feeling a little pain in his heart. You know, the usual purchase price per pound of salt is only about 5.5 shillings. This time, in order to show sincerity, I directly raised half a shilling. This is really a cut. After listening to Mark's words, Edward made a calculation directly in his heart. 3 million shillings, or 250,000 British pounds. My God. This is almost double the annual income of the royal family, and it is not much different from the national treasury income. Edward had his own manor and territory, as well as his own serfs, and there was no shortage of coal. In this way, the cost is almost zero, which means that £250,000 will be recorded every year if you lie down. Don't be too comfortable like this. With such a large profit calculated in his heart, Edward had the idea of leaving the Lloyd's family alone in his heart. But when I think about it, I don't have the contacts of the Lloyd's family in Northern Europe and Germany, so even if I produce it, I won't sell it, so I should cooperate with the Lloyd's family. But in addition to Northern Europe, Spain and Portugal, as well as the African region and the Mediterranean region, can become their own targets. As long as they occupy the market in these places, then they are going to make a fortune. No. Is that so? Although Edward was overjoyed, his face remained calm. And I don't know if Mr. Lloyd's gave me such a big gift. What can I ask for? In fact, Mark was waiting for this moment. He reluctantly gave up such a big piece of meat. Isn't it just for this opportunity, Your Majesty? I heard that Mr. Parker Matthew, the chairman of the London City Council, has come to see you. Yes, some time ago, he came to see me. Edward nodded. You're not pleading for the Hanseatic League? Then forget it, Your Majesty. I have absolutely no objection to your dealing with other merchants from the Hanseatic League. It's just that our Lloyd's family has been buying sea salt in London and has never disrupted the London market. I think our Lloyd's family should be fine. Of course, the Lloyd's family is definitely not included in the attack, Edward said seriously. This gave Mark a lot of confidence. Your Lloyd's family can continue to buy sea salt in London. So, in the rest of the time, after Edward talked with a businessman of the Lloyd's family for a while, both of them reached their own satisfactory results. The next day, Edward summoned the Chancellor and Speaker of the Privy Council, Ferris Alexander, and the Keeper of the Seal, Barman Randall. Your Majesty, do you know why you summoned us here? Chancellor of the Exchequer Alexander asked, first with a questioning tone. I called you here this time to issue a decree. Come and see how it goes. Edward looked at the puzzled eyes of the two, and said in a commanding tone the Privy Council was the same as the cabinet of the Ming Dynasty at this time. It was just an advisory body to the king and had no ability to administer autonomously. That is to say, they could not issue any decrees without the king's approval. Your Majesty, tell me, let us polish it up for you, the minister in charge of the seal said quickly, nodding and bowing. Very respectful. I have decided to abolish all the privileges of the merchants of the Hanseatic League in England, and the customs duties they need to pay will be increased to 1.5 times that of English merchants. So, you just need to draft a decree in my name. Edward didn't drive the Hanseatic merchants out of England, he just imposed heavy tariffs on them so that English merchants could compete directly with them. The most important thing is that the tariff belonged to the Tudor royal family at that time, and it was the main income of the royal family. Regardless of the import or export of goods, the tariff was still charged. It is impossible for Edward to sacrifice his own interests to satisfy those businessmen in England. Yes, Your Majesty, I will draft a decree according to your instructions. As he spoke, the Minister of Seals took out a piece of paper from the table and began to write with a quill. Your Majesty, this is really a wise decision, and I think the whole of England will thank you. On the other hand, Alexander, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, showed a happy smile and complimented Edward. Hanseatic merchants not only enjoyed preferential taxation, but also monopolized some industries, hindering the commercial prosperity of London. Chapter 125 Implementation.
The existence of Hanseatic merchants not only reduced the money collected by the London Treasury, but also hindered the development of London business. For example, in the wood industry, since England does not have wood for manufacturing seagoing ships, it needs to import a large amount from Northern Europe. The Hanseatic merchants directly monopolized England's demand for wood. Someone said, "Don't you know that you can go directly to Northern Europe to buy goods? This is the reason, but the cost of the goods you bring in from Northern Europe on the road will be higher than that of Hanseatic merchants, and after you return to England, the tax you will be charged is higher than that of Hanseatic merchants." How to sell it? Therefore, Alexander, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, was very happy that Edward abolished the privileges of the Hanseatic merchants and even increased the tariffs imposed on the Hanseatic merchants. "Your Majesty, I don't even know how to praise your decision. It's an extremely correct decision." Originally, Alexander was summoned by Edward in a daze, and he was a little annoyed. Who knew that Edward would give him such a big surprise? And it was a big surprise. "Okay, my minister, don't say any more praise. You go back and promulgate this decree." Edward directly interrupted the praise of the Chancellor of the Exchequer. "Yes, Your Majesty." The Minister of Finance touched his nose, feeling a little depressed. "Your Majesty, I've finished writing. What do you think?" The Minister of the Seal Keeper hurriedly got up, stood aside respectfully, and said softly, "Oh, it's not bad, let's do it." Edward glanced at it, feeling the same, and nodded involuntarily. "Lucy, bring me the Great Seal." Edward said to Lucy, who was standing aside immediately. After a short walk, Lucy brought Edward's jade seal. It is just a joke to say that it is a jade seal. In England, it is called a national seal. In England, the Great Seal is kept in the custody of the Lord Seal, and is affixed to proclamations, writs, royal charters and documents authorizing the signing and ratification of treaties. As for why the Great Seal is currently in Edward's place, it is because of Edward's curiosity. He wants to see what the Great Seal of England, that is, what the Great Seal looks like. So it has been more than 2 years since Edward ascended the throne. Edward hears for why the keeper of the seal did not come to Edward. One is that the Parliament has not convened once in 2 years, and the other is that Edward did not give it, and he dared not come to get it at this time. Lucy was holding a wooden plate, on which the Great Seal of England consisted of 2 silver discs with stamps on the front and back of sealing wax. It can be said that it is something like 2 badges with stamps, flat and round, completely different from our Oriental cube. It has a monarch on horseback on the front and a monarch in royal robes on the reverse. For the national seal, the English do not pay attention to inheritance like our national jade seal. England can only use a new national seal when an old national seal has been worn out, or a new dynasty has begun, or the royal coat of arms has changed. At this time, the old seal was decorated with patterns or hammered by the Speaker of the Privy Council to show that it was useless. The Minister of the Seals looked at the 2 seals in Lucy's hands, and his eyes suddenly showed surprise. He hurriedly walked to Lucy's side, and stared at the 2 flat and round individuals with wide eyes. If you have to use words to describe it, it's like seeing a couple who have been apart for too long, with deep affection hidden in their eyes. "Okay, Your Excellency the Minister, this time you're on the way, you can take the imperial seal back." Edward really couldn't see it, and suddenly felt a little guilty in his heart, like breaking up a couple. "Really? Oh, my lord, I am so happy." The keeper of the seal is like a child getting a favorite toy, unable to help himself. "Yes, my lord, you can take it back, but let's stamp this decree first." Edward couldn't help laughing, bit his teeth lightly on his lips, to prevent the laughter from coming out of his mouth, and said reluctantly, "Immediately." Barman Randall, the keeper of the seals, completed the stamping as quickly as possible, and then took the tray from Lucy's hand, holding the tray tightly with both hands, and did not let go. "Your Majesty, we both resign." Seeing that there was nothing to do, the 2 resigned to Edward at the same time. The Privy Council then proceeded to issue His Majesty's second decree, the first ending London's self-government. Then, the Mayor of London, William, heard his meaning and knew his voice, and immediately sent someone to notify the head of the city management office, the Earl of Southampton. When the Earl of Southampton heard that this was what His Majesty meant, he quickly dispatched most of the people in the hall, about 150 people, to ride to London Iron and Steel on horses borrowed from other halls. Courtyard, stronghold of Hanseatic merchants. According to Edward's will, all the privileges of Hanseatic merchants in England were abolished, so the London Steel House should also be abolished. Hundreds of people rode horses and ran aggressively on the streets of London, which shocked the citizens on the streets. Pedestrians hurriedly dodged on both sides of the street, afraid of being hit, but there was nowhere to look for reason. The Earl of Southampton rode his horse and led the way. After seeing the destination, he hurriedly reined in the horse. "Stop, The Earl raised his right hand and said loudly, "Okay, now we dismount and show off our momentum. I don't believe they dare to do anything to us." The Earl got off his horse beautifully, and said to a group of subordinates behind him, he looked like a general, "Hey, who are you and what are you doing here?" The guards guarding the gate were directing the laborers to carry the goods. Suddenly, a large number of cavalrymen on horseback appeared in front of them. Moreover, an old guy in the lead suddenly yelled, which frightened them, and the workers were also frightened, and huddled together, not even carrying the goods. The guards quickly sent someone inside to report the news, and among the guards, a burly-looking guy came out, bowed to the Earl, and said, "My lord, I don't know who you are. I am the director of the London City Management Office. This time I am here on the order of the king to demolish it. Don't try to obstruct it." The Earl of Southampton sneered, then shouted threateningly, "Here, my lord, don't be in a hurry. We are just guards. Please wait for a while. Our person in charge will come soon." The guard boss hurriedly waved his hands, trying to stop the Earl from moving. However, how could the Earl pay attention to him, a small head of guards, and then waved his hand, instructing more than 100 of his men. Due to Edward's policy, most of these urban managers are retired militiamen, and one by one, it is inevitable that there will be some with broken hands and one-eyed. These disabled militiamen did not expect that they would eat food distributed by the government one day, which made them feel warm in the hearts of those militiamen who were injured on the battlefield. In particular, they knew that this was specially arranged for them by the new King of London, which could not help but increase their loyalty to the royal family a lot, although it was not much in the first place. However, this is a good start, because it sets a good example. If things like this continue, then the entire army of England will turn to the Tudor royal family. Although each of the city management staff had disabilities, dozens of able-bodied guards were constantly retreating in the face of such a group of people. Although the militiamen were a little unhealthy physically, the murderous aura on their bodies that survived the battlefield couldn't be washed away no matter what. More importantly, the city managers are officials, but they are citizens. If this was in Germany, their Hanseatic League would not even care about ordinary aristocrats, but this is in England, a place with powerful royal power. So, when Mark Lloyds and the others came out, they saw hundreds of people in blue uniforms, hammering together with a sledgehammer, destroying the wall with a bang. "Stop!" An old man who came out with Mark screamed before he arrived. The urban management took a look at Mark and others who were slowly approaching, and then continued to start the demolition project. "Dear Lord Earl, I don't know why." Mark pointed to the urban management who were carrying out a demolition, walked up to the Earl of Southampton and said, "Oh, Mr. Lloyds, this is a decree issued by His Majesty the King today. And it is a decree personally signed by Mayor William of the City of London. You can take a closer look. However, I still have to work." The Earl didn't bother to explain, and directly took out 2 government orders, sent them to Mark's eyes, and said lazily. Mark personally took the decree from the Earl, and read it carefully, and the few people who came out with him also gathered together, bared their heads, and read together, "Hey, Your Excellency Earl, can you give us 2 days? We will tear down the wall here ourselves." Several people studied it carefully and found no loopholes, so these 2 decrees are true. Mark had expected this for a long time, but the faces of other businessmen couldn't hide their shock. The demolition of the wall is not only a matter of safety, it is more symbolic. It represents that the privileges of the Hanseatic League's Chamber of Commerce stronghold in London are completely abolished, whether it is independent judicial power, tax incentives, and independent management rights, etc. These will disappear with the disappearance of this wall. Your Excellency, can you wait for 2 days? It's such a trivial matter, so don't bother your lord. No need, we can do it ourselves. After all, we are in this business. No trouble. The Earl waved his hand, said indifferently, and then spoke to a group of busy subordinates. "Brothers, hurry up, we have to go back to eat before dark." End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.